We don't need your interpretation of what the numbers mean. The gavel cracked. Kezia Hollins stood at the witness stand, soil analysis report shaking in her grip. 14 years as an environmental engineer. 23 contamination cases. 11 federal testimonies without a single successful challenge. Reduced to interpretation. Judge Franklin Boyce leaned forward, silver hair catching fluorescent light. Reading glasses perched low on his nose like a weapon. He didn't know the court reporter had just switched her stenotype to record chambers conversations. In 72 hours, his own words would destroy his career. Courtroom 4B held 47 people. Half were Riverside Heights residents, tap water that smelled like bleach, children with rashes that wouldn't heal. Property values collapsed because no one wanted to live near a cancer cluster. The other half wore expensive suits. Marsh Chemicals' legal army. Your Honor. Attorney Clover Baines rose from the plaintiff's table. 60 years old, 3 decades of environmental cases carved into her face. The witness is qualified to interpret. I've ruled, Counselor. Boyce didn't look at her. Eyes locked on Kezia. Raw data only. The jury draws conclusions. The jury couldn't draw conclusions. That was the point. 12 people who'd never heard of trichloroethylene, who didn't know 14 times the EPA limit meant poisoned groundwater, who needed an expert to explain the contamination timeline, matched Marsh Chemicals' illegal dumping from 2019 to 2021. The timeline Kezia had spent 3 months documenting. The timeline Judge Boyce had blocked 4 times in 30 minutes. She looked at him. He looked back. Recognition passed between them. They both knew exactly what was happening. Only one was willing to admit it. The judge was burying her testimony. On purpose. In the corner, court reporter Tabitha Oakes sat with fingers on the stenotype. 52 years old. 24 years transcribing for Boyce. Her jaw tight. Breathing shallow. She typed everything. Even what wasn't supposed to be recorded. If you think this is just courtroom bias, wait until you hear what he says when he thinks no one is listening. Subscribe now. This story takes a turn no one saw coming. Objection. The witness is speculating about dates not established in evidence. Gordon Aldrich's voice sliced through the courtroom. Defense attorney, 58. Gold cufflinks worth more than most Riverside Heights residents earned in a month. Sustained. Boyce didn't hesitate. Kezia's jaw tightened. The dates were established. Exhibit 14. The EPA report she'd submitted weeks ago. Your Honor, the dates appear in Exhibit 14, admitted into evidence. Sustained, Ms. Hollins. Move on. She tried referencing the exhibit directly, reading from the document. Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence. Sustained. The pattern crystallized over 2 hours. Every time she approached one topic, contamination between 2019 and 2021, objections flew. Every objection sustained. 2019 to 2021. When Marsh Chemical negotiated land deals with developers, when they knew about contamination and hid it, the period connecting liability to profits, Clover Baines requested a sidebar. Attorneys approached the bench, voices low. Your Honor, the defense is systematically preventing my witness from testifying about the core timeline. Counsel, I've ruled on each objection individually. Boyce's voice carried the patience of a man who knew he was winning. If you have concerns about judicial conduct, you know the procedure. Kezia watched from the stand, watched the judge's hand rest casually on the bench, watched Aldrich nod almost imperceptibly. They weren't even trying to hide it. The recess came at 11:15. Kezia gathered her materials, walked toward the witness room, legs steady, face composed. 14 years of being the only black woman in hostile rooms had taught her to look calm when everything was falling apart. Halfway down the hallway, a hand grabbed her arm. Hard. Fingers digging into flesh. She turned. A man she didn't recognize. 36. Buzz cut. The build of someone who lived in the gym. Jeans and polo shirt. Casual enough to blend, expensive enough to suggest money. Dr. Hollins. Voice friendly. Grip brutal. My uncle works at the Marsh plant. 40 years. Good man. Let go of me. Just a friendly conversation. He squeezed harder, bones grinding together. Your testimony affects real people, families, people who might not appreciate an outsider telling them their life's work is poison. I said let go. Data can be interpreted different ways. He leaned closer, breath like coffee and something sour. Maybe you should interpret differently. Kezia's free hand found her phone, pulled it out, held it up. I'm recording this. His smile flickered. This is Kezia Hollins, Cuyahoga County Courthouse, second floor hallway, being physically restrained by an unidentified male attempting to intimidate me regarding testimony in case number 2024-CV-08847. He released her arm, stepped back. Hands raised in mock surrender. Just a friendly conversation. No need to make it official. He walked away, casual, unhurried, message delivered. Kezia's arm throbbed where he'd gripped it. She photographed the red marks already forming, saved to 3 separate cloud drives, documentation, always documentation. She found Clover in the witness room. I was just assaulted in the hallway. Clover's face went white. What? A man grabbed my arm, told me to change my testimony. Kezia showed the photos. I recorded part of it. Did you get his name? No, but I'm filing a police report before we go back in. Clover stared at the bruises darkening on Kezia's forearm. They're escalating. They're desperate. Kezia's voice was steel, which means we're close to something they don't want exposed. The courthouse police took her statement in a windowless room that smelled like old coffee and older carpet. Officer Dennis Malloy, 53. The particular weariness of a man who'd heard 1,000 complaints and believed maybe 10 of them. Can you describe the individual again, ma'am? White male, mid-30s, approximately 6 feet tall, muscular build, buzz cut, wearing dark jeans and a navy polo shirt. And he grabbed your arm? Yes. Did he make any specific threats? He told me to interpret data differently. He mentioned my testimony affecting people's families. Malloy wrote slowly, too slowly, the body language of someone going through motions. Did he say he would hurt you? He was already hurting me. Look at my arm. She held it up. The fingerprint bruises had deepened to purple. Malloy glanced at them, glanced away. I meant verbal threats, ma'am. He said data can be interpreted different ways. In the context of grabbing me hard enough to leave marks, I consider that a threat. But no explicit statement of intent to harm. Kezia felt her patience fraying. Officer, a man I've never met grabbed me in a public hallway and suggested I change my testimony in a case involving $47 million in damages. Whether he explicitly said, I will hurt you, seems less relevant than the fact that he already did. Malloy set down his pen. The look on his face was familiar, the one that said difficult witness without saying it. I'll file the report, ma'am, but without a clear threat or witnesses. The hallway has security cameras. I'll check if they were operational. If not that, Kezia understood. Another report that would go nowhere. Another incident documented and filed and forgotten. But she'd learned years ago that documentation mattered even when no one seemed to care. Because eventually, patterns became undeniable. Eventually, the weight of evidence broke through walls that individual complaints couldn't dent. I want a copy of the report for my records. Standard procedure is, I want a copy of the report. Malloy sighed. I'll have it sent to the email on file. She left the police station with nothing but a case number and the certainty that she was fighting alone. The afternoon session brought new attacks. Gordon Aldrich called his expert witness, Dr. Derek Fawn, 45, Ph.D. from a for-profit university that had been investigated for academic fraud, 47 cases defending corporate polluters on his resume. He testified for 3 hours. Detailed, technical, utterly wrong. Cited studies that had been discredited, misrepresented EPA guidelines, used statistical techniques that would fail peer review in any legitimate journal. but he said it with confidence, authority, the assurance of a man who knew the judge would protect him. Dr. Fawn's report identifies several instances where Miss Hollins's documentation differs from standard protocols. Aldrich's voice was butter smooth. Those protocols were withdrawn in 2019. Kezia couldn't stop herself. The current standard is EPA method 8260D version 3. Your Honor. Aldrich turned to the bench. The witness is interrupting. Ms. Hollins, you will speak only when addressed. Boyce's voice was ice. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. Contempt. For correcting a lie. She sat back, watched Fawn continue, watched the jury take notes on outdated science presented as current fact, watched justice get buried. When Clover attempted cross-examination, Boyce limited her questions to near uselessness. The witness's prior testimony record is not relevant to this proceeding. Your Honor, it goes to bias. I've ruled. Move on. Block, obstruct, redirect, every avenue closed. The gallery had thinned by 4 p.m. Most of the Riverside Heights residents had returned to work or family obligations. The Marsh Chemical suits remained in full force, note-takers, strategists, the machinery of corporate defense. Mrs. Delilah Patterson sat alone in the third row, 67 years old, retired teacher, 3 children raised in Riverside Heights, 1 buried last year, stomach cancer at 42. She hadn't missed a single day of testimony. Kezia caught her eye during a brief recess. Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly, rosary beads wrapped around weathered fingers. The nod said, "What words couldn't? Keep fighting. We're counting on you." It was the only encouragement Kezia had received all day. The afternoon dragged, more technical testimony designed to confuse rather than illuminate, more objections sustained, more evidence blocked. By 5:30, Judge Boyce called adjournment with the particular satisfaction of a man who had accomplished exactly what he'd set out to do. Court will resume at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Witness is reminded she remains under oath. Kezia gathered her materials. Her shoulders ached from tension held too long. Her arm throbbed where Brick had grabbed her. She was halfway to the door when Gordon Aldrich intercepted her. Dr. Hollins, a word? Every instinct screamed warning, but refusing would look weak, afraid. What is it? I wanted to apologize for the intensity of today's proceedings. His voice was smooth, reasonable, nothing like the aggressive cross-examiner from hours before. Expert testimony can get heated. No hard feelings, I hope. Is there something specific you wanted? Just extending professional courtesy. He smiled. The smile didn't reach his eyes. It's a small legal community. We'll likely encounter each other again. No reason for this case to create permanent enemies. I'm not interested in being your enemy, Mr. Aldrich. I'm interested in telling the truth about what Marsh Chemical did to Riverside Heights. Of course, we all want the truth. He paused, deliberate. Though truth is complicated, isn't it? Data, interpretation, context. Reasonable experts can disagree. They can. But Dr. Fawn isn't disagreeing reasonably. He's citing withdrawn protocols and misrepresenting current standards. That's your interpretation. That's documented fact. The EPA website lists exactly when those protocols were withdrawn. Aldrich's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. You're very confident for someone in your position. What position is that? A government employee, mid-level, testifying against a corporation with resources you can't imagine. He leaned slightly closer. Corporations with long memories and longer reaches. Kezia felt cold settle in her chest. Is that a threat, counselor? It's an observation. Your career has been impressive so far. 14 years without incident. It would be a shame if that changed. My career is based on accurate data and proper methodology, neither of which is threatened by this testimony. Methodology can be questioned. Data can be challenged. Careers can be audited. He straightened. Professional mask back in place. Just something to consider. Have a good evening, Dr. Hollins. He walked away before she could respond. Kezia stood in the emptying courtroom, processing what had just happened. A defense attorney had just implied her career could be destroyed if she continued testifying. Not quite a threat. Nothing she could report without sounding paranoid. Just another pressure point. Another reminder that the system protected itself. She documented the conversation in her notes app. Time. Location. Exact words as best she could remember. Then she walked to the parking garage, checking over her shoulder the entire way. Level 2 was nearly empty at 6:30. Her Honda Accord sat near the east stairwell. Same spot she'd used for 3 days. She saw the damage from 20 feet away. Driver's side window, shattered. Glass scattered across the front seat like malicious confetti. She stopped, photographed everything, called 911. Officers arrived 18 minutes later, the same Officer Malloy from earlier. "Rough day, ma'am. Someone smashed my car window. I can see that." He circled the vehicle. "Any valuables taken?" "I don't know. I haven't touched it." "Smart." He pulled out a flashlight, peered through the broken window. "Looks like the interior is undisturbed. Purse? Electronics?" "I had everything with me in the courtroom." Malloy straightened. "So, nothing taken?" "That I can tell." "Window smash with no theft." He made a note. "Could be random vandalism. Garage security isn't great. I was assaulted in the courthouse this morning. Filed a report with you. Now my car is vandalized in the courthouse garage. You don't see a connection?" "I see 2 incidents on the same day. Connection requires evidence." He clicked his pen. Same deliberate slowness as before. "Did anyone follow you to the garage?" "I don't know. I was focused on getting to my car." "Security cameras?" "I asked about those this morning. You were going to check." Malloy's expression flickered, caught. "I'll include that in the follow-up." "Do the cameras in this garage work?" "Budget cuts have affected coverage throughout the facility." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer I have, ma'am." They processed the scene, gave her another case number, left her alone with her damaged car and the certainty this wasn't random, just her window. No other damage, no theft. A message. "We can reach you anywhere." She called a rideshare. Sat in the back seat watching the city pass through rain-streaked glass. Her apartment building appeared through evening traffic. 3 stories. Converted warehouse. Plants on every windowsill. A habit from years of testing contaminated soil, appreciating things that grew despite everything working against them. The front door was propped open with a brick. Her stomach dropped. Could be a delivery driver too lazy to wait for residents to buzz in. Happened occasionally. Or it could be something else. She took the stairs slowly, checked each landing, reached her floor. Her apartment door looked normal, intact. No scratches on the lock. But the small piece of tape she'd placed along the seam that morning, documentation of whether anyone entered while she was gone, was broken. Someone had been inside. She didn't go in. Back down the stairs. Called 911 from the sidewalk. 3rd time today. The dispatcher's voice carried the weary patience of someone who dealt with anxious callers regularly. "Officers are en route, ma'am. Please wait outside." The wait took 11 minutes. 2 officers this time, neither one Malloy, small mercy. They searched the apartment, found nothing missing, nothing obviously disturbed. "Are you sure someone entered, ma'am?" The younger officer looked skeptical. "No sign of forced entry. I place tape on my door seam when I leave for extended periods." The tape was broken. "Tape?" "I document everything. Professional habit." The officers exchanged a glance, the one that said paranoid without saying it. "We can file a report, but without evidence of criminal activity." "File the report." They left. Kezia walked through her apartment room by room, files in place, laptop untouched, backup drives accounted for. But on her kitchen counter, centered precisely where she couldn't miss it, was a photograph. Her sister Ada, Standing outside her office in Columbus, time-stamped yesterday. No note, no explanation. We know where your family is. Her hands shook as she photographed the photograph, saved it to encrypted drives, then called Ada. Don't go to work tomorrow. What? I have a meeting at... Work from home. Don't answer the door for anyone you don't know. Kezia, you're scaring me. Good, you should be scared. She explained everything, the assault, the car, the break-in, the photograph. Ada was silent for a long moment. Processing. Who's doing this? People who don't want me testifying. Can't the police protect you? The police have filed 3 reports today. I don't expect any of them to go anywhere. Kezia, Ada's voice cracked. Maybe you should stop. Whatever you're trying to prove, is it worth this? 2,400 families, Ada. Kids with lead poisoning, cancer clusters, people dying because a corporation poisoned their water and covered it up. I understand that. But you're not the only person who can help them. You're not required to sacrifice yourself. Who else is going to do it? Who else has the documentation, the expertise, the willingness to walk into that courtroom day after day while they threaten my family? Silence. I can't tell you to stop, Ada said finally. I know you won't listen anyway. But please, be careful. Call me every day. Let me know you're okay. I will. And Kezia, if it gets worse than this, if they actually try to hurt you, I'll handle it. That's not, Ada sighed, the particular sigh of a younger sister who had learned long ago that arguing with Kezia was pointless. Just survive. Whatever else happens, survive. I intend to. She hung up, stared at the photograph of her sister on her kitchen counter. The threat was clear, escalation was certain, and she had no intention of stopping. He thought threatening her family would make her stop. He thought vandalism and intimidation would silence her. But Kezia Hollins had spent 14 years documenting contamination that killed children. She wasn't backing down now. Subscribe, because what she discovers next changes everything. 3 weeks earlier, the subpoena arrived. Kezia's apartment. 7 a.m. Coffee cooling on the counter. Certified envelope in her hands. In re, Marsh Chemical Corporation Class Action. Case number 2024-CV-08847. Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas. She photographed the envelope before opening it. The postmark, the return address, the seal, then the document itself. Every page, saved to 3 cloud drives, muscle memory. You document everything when you're the only black woman in rooms full of people who might later claim you said something you didn't. The subpoena called for her testimony as an expert witness. Her soil samples from Riverside Heights. Her chain of custody documentation. Her analysis showing trichloroethylene levels 14 times above EPA limits in 17 of 23 sample sites. Her work was being used to hold Marsh Chemical accountable. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Her sister called that night. You sure about this? Marsh Chemical has deep pockets. People who testify against them have problems. What kind of problems? You remember Mrs. Owens from the neighborhood? Her cousin testified against an automotive plant in Toledo. Lost her job 6 months later. Budget cuts, they said. I'm sure about the data, Ada. That's all I can be sure about. Data doesn't protect you from people with money and grudges. Neither does silence. She visited Riverside Heights the week before testimony. The neighborhood had aged since her last visit 2 years ago. More boarded windows, more for sale signs no one would answer, more evidence of the slow death contamination brings to a community. Mrs. Delilah Patterson still lived in the yellow house on the corner of Riverside and Oak. The paint was peeling now, the porch steps sagged, but she was there, rocking in the same chair, rosary beads in weathered hands. You gonna tell them what's in our water, baby? Kezia sat on the porch steps, looking out at the street where she'd collected soil samples, where children used to play before parents started keeping them inside. Yes, ma'am, that's what I'm going to do. They'll try to stop you. I know. My grandson used to play in the yard right there. Mrs. Patterson pointed to a patch of brown grass. Before we knew. Before the rashes started. Before Marcus got sick. Marcus. Her son. The one she'd buried last year. I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson. Sorry doesn't bring him back. Justice doesn't either. She rocked slowly. But somebody has to tell the truth about what happened here. Somebody has to make them pay. That's what I intend to do. Then you be careful in that courtroom, Mrs. Patterson's eyes were sharp despite her years. The law doesn't always mean justice, not for people like us. I know. Do you? She stopped rocking, leaned forward. You got education. Good job. Nice apartment away from all this. Easy to forget what it's like down here in the mud. I grew up 3 blocks from here, Mrs. Patterson. I haven't forgotten anything. The old woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you. That's why I'm warning you. They'll come for you the way they came for us. Slow at first, then all at once. And by the time you see it clearly, you'll already be drowning. I can swim. I hope so, baby. I surely hope so. Day 2 of testimony began with rain and revelation. Kezia arrived at 7:30, an hour early. Time to center herself before whatever Gordon Aldrich had planned. The courthouse was surrounded, television cameras on the steps, reporters clustered near the entrance, police line barely holding them back. Something had happened. She entered through a side door, badged through security with her witness pass. The guard barely glanced at her, too busy watching the commotion outside, fragments of conversation in the hallway. Leaked internal memo. Marsh chemical stock down 8%. Company knew for years. She found Clover Baines in the witness room, phone pressed to her ear, face tight with controlled excitement. I understand. Yes, we'll discuss before proceedings. She hung up, looked at Kezia. Someone leaked Marsh Chemical's internal communications to the Cleveland Plain dealer. Which communications? Engineering reports from 2018, showing the company knew about groundwater contamination a full year before they disclosed to the EPA. Kezia's pulse quickened. 2018, a year before the timeline Judge Boyce had been protecting. That supports everything I've documented. It does more than that. It proves knowledge, and knowledge establishes liability. Clover gathered her files. The defense will request a continuance. Boyce will have to decide whether to grant it. He'll grant it. He's been doing everything possible to delay. Maybe. But now there's media attention, national coverage coming. If he grants without good reason, it looks like he's protecting Marsh Chemical. He is protecting them. Now he might have to be more careful about it. Outside courtroom 4B, familiar faces waited. The man from yesterday, Brick, she'd learned from the police report. Brick Holloway, plant manager's nephew. Not alone this time. A woman beside him, late 50s, pearl earrings, Hermes scarf worth more than Kezia's car payment. Sherry Aldrich, defense attorney's wife. They stood together near the courtroom doors, muscle and money, physical threat and social destruction. Sherry noticed Kezia's approach, leaned close to Brick, murmured something. They both laughed. Then Sherry turned, looked directly at Kezia, and smiled. The smile said, "We're winning. You can't stop us." Kezia walked toward the doors. Brick stepped into her path. "Excuse me. Just wanted to say good morning." He didn't move. "You look tired. Hard night?" Step aside. Making conversation. Being friendly. Step aside or I'm calling security. Her phone was out before he finished speaking. Brick's smile flickered. He moved barely enough for her to pass. As she walked by, he leaned close. "Your sister has a nice office in Columbus. That building has terrible security. Anybody could walk right in." Kezia's hand closed into a fist. For one blazing moment, she wanted to turn and punch him, feel knuckles connect with his smug face. But that was what they wanted, a reaction they could use. She kept walking. Behind her, Brick laughed. Inside, Sherry Aldrich had already taken her seat in the front row. Watching, waiting. The gallery was more crowded than yesterday. Word of the leaked documents had spread. Reporters filled the back rows, notebooks ready. Judge Boyce entered at 9 sharp. If he was aware of the morning's news, his expression didn't show it. Same casual authority, same reading glasses, same air of a man who controlled everything in his domain. Court is in session. Ms. Hollins, please resume the stand. Kezia took her place, reaffirmed her oath. Gordon Aldrich approached. His movements were slightly faster than yesterday. Tense. The leaked documents had rattled him. Ms. Hollins, let's return to your methodology. I'm ready. You testified yesterday that you followed EPA method 8260D precisely, correct? Yes. Yet Dr. Fahn's report identifies instances where your documentation differs from standard protocols. Dr. Fahn cites protocols from 2017. Those were withdrawn February 2019. The current standard, which I followed, is EPA method 8260D version 3. Aldrich hesitated. Fraction of a second. She caught it. Are you suggesting Dr. Fahn isn't current on methodology? I'm stating the protocols he cited are no longer in use. Whether he's aware is for him to explain. Someone in the gallery coughed to cover a laugh. Mrs. Patterson, front row, rosary beads in hand. Aldrich regrouped. Regardless of which protocols, your findings led to specific conclusions, correct? My findings report what samples show. Conclusions are drawn by... Your Honor. Aldrich turned to the bench. The witness is interpreting again. Sustained. Ms. Hollins, confine yourself to data. The pattern continued, but something was different. The media presence, the leaked documents, the sense that ground had shifted. At 11:15, recess was called. Kezia stepped down from the stand. Near the chamber's door, she saw them. Judge Boyce and Gordon Aldrich, heads close together, speaking low. Not the formal distance of judge and counsel. The easy posture of colleagues, friends. Boyce laughed at something Aldrich said, clapped him on the shoulder, disappeared into chambers. Aldrich turned, saw Kezia watching. His expression flickered, awareness that something had been observed. Then the mask returned, and he walked toward the men's room as if nothing had happened. Kezia filed the moment away. Another data point. She started toward the witness room when a hand grabbed her elbow, hard, Brick Holloway appearing from nowhere. Think you dropped something? Let go of me. Just being helpful. He pressed something into her palm. His fingers squeezed her wrist, grinding bones together. Watch where you step. Old buildings have accidents. Let go. He released her with a shove that sent her stumbling backward. She caught herself against the wall. Have a nice day. He walked away. Kezia leaned against the wall, rubbing her wrist where red marks were forming. She uncrumpled the paper he'd pressed into her hand. A photograph. Her apartment building. A red circle drawn around the entrance. We know where you live. When you're home. When you're not. She photographed the photograph, documented the new bruises, then walked into the witness room and prepared for another day. The afternoon brought Helen Marsh to the stand, 74 years old, widow of the company founder, chairwoman of Marsh Chemicals Charitable Foundation. She testified for 45 minutes about community commitment, scholarships funded, parks maintained, jobs provided, masterfully done. An elderly woman with kind eyes talking about all the good her family's company had done for Cleveland. Not one word about contamination. Not one mention of sick families. Just warmth, generosity, and the implied suggestion that criticizing Marsh Chemical meant attacking a beloved institution. When Clover attempted cross-examination, Judge Boyce limited her questions so severely She could barely establish Mrs. Marsh's knowledge of company operations. The witness testified to charitable activities. Knowledge of operational details is not relevant. Your Honor, I've ruled, Counselor. Block, obstruct, redirect. The whisper campaign started on day 3. Kezia noticed it the moment she entered the courthouse, conversations stopping when she approached, eyes sliding away. In the elevator, 2 women in professional attire. Heard she falsified data in a previous case. Loud enough to hear, quiet enough to deny. Outside courtroom 4B, a cluster of men in expensive suits, Marsh Chemical's PR team, fell silent as she passed. One smiled. She was being marked. Transformed from credible expert into someone whose reputation could be questioned. Sherry Aldrich's work, country club connections, charity board gossip, the informal networks where reputations died quietly. Personal vendetta against the chemical industry, exaggerates findings for attention, questions about mental stability, none true, all effective. By lunch, even Clover looked worried. People are talking, courthouse gossip spreading fast. It's lies. Lies don't need to be true to cause damage. Clover's expression was grim. We need to address this. Maybe file a motion about witness intimidation. On what grounds? Rumors aren't actionable. No, but a pattern of harassment might be. Kezia thought about the assault, the vandalism, the break-in, the photograph of Ada, the whispers, coordinated, all of it. It's connected. Boyce, Aldrich, whoever's running the whisper campaign, they're working together. I believe you, but believing isn't proof. Then we need proof. How? Kezia didn't answer. She was thinking about court reporter Tabitha Oakes. 24 years transcribing for Boyce. Her tight jaw, her shallow breathing, the way she typed everything, even things not meant for record. Someone inside the system is watching, recording, waiting. How do you know? Because people who are this confident always make mistakes. They say things they shouldn't in places they think are private. You're talking about surveillance. Chambers' conversations are protected. I'm not talking about doing anything illegal. I'm saying illegal things produce evidence on their own. People talk. Records exist. Someone knows what's really happening. And if they come forward, then we have what we need. Courthouse women's restroom, 2nd floor, 3:45 p.m. Kezia entered needing a moment away from watching eyes. Empty, or so she thought. A stall door opened. A woman emerged. Older, black, courthouse badge on a lanyard. Tabitha Oakes. Court reporter. They made eye contact in the mirror. Neither spoke. Tabitha walked to the sink beside Kezia, washed her hands slowly, deliberately. Something was on the counter between them. A flash drive. Small. Black. A label in neat handwriting. 320 Chambers, 2:47 p.m. Tabitha dried her hands. Walked toward the door. Paused with fingers on the handle. Someone needs to know. Barely a whisper. What he says when he thinks it's off the record. She left. Kezia stared at the flash drive. When the time is right, you'll receive what you need. The anonymous caller from 2 nights ago. The woman who believed truth mattered. Tabitha Oakes. 24 years transcribing Boyce's words. She'd decided to fight back. Kezia didn't listen until she was home that night. Dinner first, documentation of the day, response to Ada's worried text, then her dining table, laptop open, flash drive inserted, one file. 7 minutes, 23 seconds. She pressed play. Static at first, then voices. Judge Boyce, Gordon Aldrich, small room acoustics. Shouldn't take more than another week. Aldrich, then Boyce. Between us, Gordon, where did they find this woman? Kezia froze. Another DEI hire playing scientist. You can see it in her eyes. She's got an agenda. Blood drained from her face. Aldrich laughed. She's certainly passionate about her conclusions. Passionate, That's one word. Boyce's contempt was naked. I've seen her type before. They get these positions, then think they're qualified to lecture us about chemistry. Her hands shook. She paused the audio, breathed, pressed play. She does have impressive credentials, Frank. Aldrich's voice, almost reasonable. 14 years with EPA, federal testimony. Credentials don't mean competence. Anyone can pad a resume. There it was. He knew. Franklin Boyce knew exactly who she was, how qualified she was, how solid her testimony was, and dismissed her anyway, because she was black, because she was a woman, because she dared tell truth that powerful men didn't want to hear. The audio continued. 7 more minutes. Casual racism, strategic discussion of limiting testimony, explicit acknowledgement that the goal was protecting the contamination timeline. By the end, Kezia was crying. Not from sadness, from rage. 14 years of excellence, of proving herself in hostile rooms, of building a career so impeccable no reasonable person could question it. Still not enough. Still a man with a gavel could look at everything she'd accomplished and see only agenda. DEI hire, someone unqualified to lecture about chemistry. She thought about Mrs. Patterson, the children with lead poisoning, the cancer clusters. They were counting on her. Now she had proof the system was rigged. What was she supposed to do with it? She called Clover at 11 p.m. I have something. Audio from Boyce's chambers. March 20th. Silence. Then, how did you get it? Someone gave it to me. Someone watching. What's on it? Boyce making racist comments about my credibility. Discussing with Aldrich how to limit testimony. Acknowledging they know exactly how qualified I am and don't care. Send it to me. I will. But I need to know what happens when I do. What do you mean? If I give this to you, you have to disclose through proper procedures. Judicial conduct complaint. Ethics board. As an officer of the court, yes. And Boyce's lawyers find ways to suppress it. Challenge how it was obtained. Argue chambers conversations are privileged. Possibly. How long does that take? Months. Maybe longer. The trial could be over. Probably. Kezia looked at the flash drive. 7 minutes that could change everything, if they reached the right ears at the right time. What if it didn't go through official channels first? Long pause. Kezia, I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. I'm asking what happens if someone else releases this, someone not bound by officer of the court obligations. Then it becomes public. Whatever happens after is out of everyone's control. But it would be heard. Yes, it would be heard. Kezia closed her eyes. Mrs. Patterson's weathered face, the rash on her arms, the son she buried. Send me a copy, Clover said finally. I'll figure out proper procedure. But if you're thinking about other options, I'm thinking about everything. Be careful. Whatever you decide has consequences. There are already consequences. For the people Marsh Chemical poisoned. He called her a DEI higher-playing scientist. He said credentials don't mean competence. He laughed about limiting her testimony. And he didn't know someone recorded every word. Subscribe now. When this audio hits the public, the explosion will be unlike anything you've ever seen. Flynn Weaver ran a podcast called Rust Belt Reckoning. 10,000 subscribers. Environmental justice focus. Former newspaper reporter who'd left corporate media to do independent work. Kezia found him at 2 a.m. through research fueled by rage and insomnia. Encrypted email. I have documentation of judicial misconduct in an environmental case. Interested? 3 minutes later. Very. Can we meet? Great Lakes Brewing Company. Noon the next day. Flynn arrived exactly on time. 40 years old, red hair going gray at the temples, messenger bag that had seen better decades. The slightly disheveled appearance of someone who cared more about truth than presentation. He spotted her immediately, walked over, sat. Ms. Hollins, you said you have documentation. I do. About Judge Boyce? Yes. He pulled out a paper notebook. Old habits. I've been covering environmental cases in the Rust Belt for 15 years. Marsh chemical comes up often, never favorably. That doesn't surprise me. Tell me what you have. She told him everything. The trial, the systematic objections, the blocked timeline, Brick Holloway, the vandalized car, the break-in, the photograph of Ada, the whisper campaign, the financial connections between Boyce's wife and Lakewood Development Partners, and the audio. Flynn's expression didn't change as she spoke. He took notes in shorthand she couldn't read, asked clarifying questions, let her finish. You have proof a sitting judge made racist comments about you in chambers. 7 minutes of audio. How was it obtained? Someone with access gave it to me. Will they go on record? Kezia thought about Tabitha Oakes, her quiet determination, her 24 years of loyalty to a system that had betrayed everyone it was supposed to protect. I don't know. Maybe not. That makes it complicated. Without authentication, the audio is authentic. Anyone who knows Boyce would recognize the voice. But legally, I'm not worried about legal admissibility. Kezia leaned forward. 2,400 families depend on a trial that's being rigged. If the audio becomes public, Boyce's credibility is destroyed. Public opinion shifts. Pressure on Marsh Chemical increases. Settlement calculus changes. Exactly. Flynn was quiet, thinking. You understand what you're asking. I understand what I'm offering. An exclusive. Audio evidence of judicial racism. The kind of story that builds careers. And destroys others. Boyce's career deserves destruction. Maybe. His eyes were sharp. But decisions like that have consequences we can't predict. The consequences of silence are predictable. More families get sick. More children get poisoned. More corporations get away with murder while judges protect them. Flynn picked up his pen, clicked it absently. I'll need to verify the audio, confirm voices, research Boyce's background, prepare a proper story, not just a leak. How long? A week, maybe less if things move. The trial could be over in a week. The trial is almost beside the point now. Flynn's voice was gentle but firm. What you're giving me isn't evidence for court. It's evidence for public opinion. Different timeline. He was right. She knew it. The families still have to wait. They've been waiting years. Another week won't change ultimate outcome. What will change things is a story that forces the system to reckon with what was done. Not just Marsh Chemical, the judge, the lawyers, everyone who conspired. Kezia reached into her purse, pulled out a copy of the flash drive. Everything's here. Audio, documentation, financial disclosures showing Boyce's conflicts. Flynn took it, slipped it into his bag. I'll be in touch, soon. I know. He stood, paused. What you're doing is brave, and necessary, and it's going to cost you things you can't anticipate. I know that too. Good. The people who don't know are the ones who get destroyed. He left. Kezia sat alone with untouched beer, watching the door long after he was gone. She'd handed over the most explosive evidence she'd ever possessed. Now she waited to see what burned. Walking back to her car, 2 blocks away. Afternoon cold. Wind off Lake Erie with bite. Halfway down the block, footsteps behind her. Fast. Closing. She turned as a man reached her. Young, unfamiliar, wild eyes. He grabbed her purse strap, yanked hard. She held on. Let go! He pulled harder. Her shoulder wrenched painfully. She twisted, using body weight to throw him off balance. 14 years walking through contaminated sites had taught her to plant her feet, stay grounded on uncertain terrain. He stumbled. She drove her elbow into his chest, hard, and shoved. He went down on the sidewalk, lost his grip. Stay down. Her voice was steadier than expected. "I'm calling police." He scrambled up and ran. She didn't chase. Documented instead. Direction, height, build, clothing. A witness at the corner coffee shop had seen everything. Police arrived in 12 minutes. Another report. Another file. Random crime? Or message disguised as random? Couldn't prove either way. That was the point. The podcast dropped at 6 a.m. on Thursday. Rust Belt Reckoning, Episode 47. The Judge, the Witness, and the Buried Timeline. Flynn Weaver's voice opened with quiet intensity. What you're about to hear is audio from a chambers conference in Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas. The voices belong to Judge Franklin Boyce, 22-year veteran of the bench, and Gordon Aldrich, defense attorney for Marsh Chemical Corporation. The witness they're discussing is Dr. Kezia Hollins, senior environmental engineer with 14 years at Ohio EPA, doctorate in environmental science from Ohio State, federal court testimony in 11 cases without a single successful methodology challenge. The audio played. Another DEI hire playing scientist. Credentials don't mean competence. Anyone can pad a resume. The world began to burn. By 7 a.m., 15,000 downloads. By 8, 50,000. By noon, 200,000 and climbing. Local news at 7:30, national by 9. Judge Boyce trending by noon. Ohio Supreme Court statement at 3 p.m. Reviewing the matter with urgency. Kezia's phone rang constantly. Reporters, attorneys, strangers expressing support or outrage. She didn't answer. At 4:17, courthouse notification. Jury reached verdict. She drove through streets packed with news vans, protesters with signs outside the courthouse. Justice for Riverside Heights. Boyce must go. Racist judges out. Inside, controlled chaos. Deputies struggling to maintain order. Attorneys shell-shocked. Clover Baines waited outside courtroom 4B. Jury's been deliberating 5 days. They couldn't have heard the podcast. Not officially. Unofficially? Someone always tells someone. They filed in. Judge Boyce sat at the bench. Face gray. 10 years older than that morning. The audio had clearly reached him. 7 minutes destroying 22 years of careful image. But he was still the judge. Still presiding. Still clinging to authority that was slipping away with every passing moment. Bring in the jury. 12 faces filed into the box. Expressions neutral. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson stood. Middle-aged black woman who had sat quietly through days of technical testimony. We have, Your Honor. What say you? She unfolded a paper, hands steady. In the matter of Riverside Heights, residents versus Marsh Chemical Corporation, we the jury find for the plaintiffs. The courtroom erupted. Kezia didn't hear the specifics. Damages, allocation, legal language. She heard only the word that mattered. Plaintiffs. They'd won. The aftermath was controlled demolition. Ohio Supreme Court emergency order within 24 hours. Boyce suspended from the case pending investigation. Transferred to visiting Judge Hazel Odom from Franklin County. Marsh Chemical filed motions for new trial citing prejudicial coverage. Denied. Verdict stood. Board of Professional Conduct opened formal investigation. 17 additional complaints arrived the first week. Other attorneys, witnesses, people finally safe to speak. Kezia's name was everywhere. The black scientist who took down a racist judge. She gave one interview to Flynn Weaver, then retreated. But the cost was still being calculated. 3 weeks after the verdict, her apartment. Documentation spread across the dining table. Files for the Board of Professional Conduct hearing. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Ms. Hollins? Woman's voice. Familiar. Tabitha? Pause. I heard the verdict. I'm glad. I couldn't have done it without you. Don't. Sharp. Final. Don't say anything connecting us. Not on a phone. Are you okay? I'm retired. Voluntarily. That's what paperwork says. They forced you out. They gave me a choice. Retire with pension or face investigation into how recordings leaked. Bitter laugh. 24 years of service. That's what it's worth. I'm sorry. You didn't do anything wrong. Neither did I. We told truth. Pause. But truth has consequences. For everyone. Kezia thought about Tabitha's steady fingers on the stenotype, her determination, her sacrifice. Will you be okay? I have pension, family, clear conscience, more than some people have. Silence. If you find anything else about Boyce, anything beyond what's public, remember you're not the only one who wants to know. Click. Tabitha was gone. Pushed out for doing right, but she'd made a choice that changed everything. A flash drive arrived in Kezia's mailbox 2 weeks later. No return address, no note. Plain brown envelope. Label in familiar handwriting. Lakewood 2019. Tabitha Oakes was still fighting. Kezia inserted the drive, began reading. Board meeting minutes from Lakewood Development Partners, January 2019, before contamination was public knowledge. After Marsh Chemical's internal reports documented the problem. Land purchases at 70 cents on the dollar. Discussions about environmental considerations to be managed. References to judicial consultation, ensuring favorable regulatory treatment. A name appearing 17 times throughout the documents. Franklin Boyce, not as a judge, as a consultant. Paid $15,000 per meeting to provide legal guidance on how Lakewood could acquire contaminated properties without liability exposure. He hadn't just failed to recuse himself from a case where his wife had conflicts. He'd been personally involved in the scheme to profit from contamination while blocking families from seeking justice. Kezia sat back, stared at the documents. This wasn't judicial misconduct. This was criminal conspiracy, and she had proof. She called Flynn at midnight. I have something new, much bigger than the audio. What? Documents showing Boyce wasn't just biased. He was paid, directly, by Lakewood Development Partners, the company his wife sits on the board of, the company that bought contaminated land from Marsh Chemical at discount prices. Silence. Then, how much? $105,000 over 7 months, documented in board meeting minutes. Where did you get them? Same source as before. Kezia, Flynn's voice carried warning. If we publish this, it's not just a story about racist comments. It's accusation of criminal conduct. Defamation liability alone. It's not defamation if it's true. It's not defamation if we can prove it's true. In court. With witnesses and authenticated documents and chain of custody that survives legal challenge. The documents are authentic. They're files on a flash drive anonymously delivered to your mailbox. Any lawyer will argue they were fabricated, altered, obtained illegally. Kezia looked at the documents spread across her table. Months of someone's careful collection. Years of evidence proving what everyone suspected but no one could demonstrate. So what do I do? Take it to authorities, FBI, State Attorney General, people with subpoena power. And they'll open an investigation that takes years while Boyce's lawyers file motion after motion. Meanwhile, he walks free. Maybe. Probably. Flynn's voice softened. But the alternative is publishing accusations we can't fully verify, getting sued, watching the story get buried under claims of media bias. There has to be another way. There is. It just takes longer than you want. The board hearing is in 3 weeks. I know. If these documents came out during the hearing, not published, not broadcast, but entered into official record through proper channels, then they'd be part of public proceeding, protected, attributable to the board's investigation rather than media outlet. Can you get them to the right person? Flynn was silent for a long moment. I know someone on the board's staff, a paralegal frustrated with how slowly investigation is moving. Another pause. Would have to be anonymous. No connection to you or me. Do it. Kezia? 3 weeks. If we wait longer, Boyce's lawyers bury the original complaint under procedural challenges. And if it doesn't work? At least we tried. Flynn exhaled. Resignation. Determination. I'll make calls. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when it's over. The flash drive sat on her table. Evidence of conspiracy. Proof of corruption. Kezia thought about Mrs. Patterson in her yellow house, the rash spreading on her arms, the grandson who might go to college if the settlement came through. She thought about Tabitha Oakes, forced into retirement for telling truth. She thought about all the people who had been silenced, ignored, dismissed, all the DEI hires and outsiders who had tried to expose wrongdoing and been crushed by systems designed to protect power. The audio had been Phase 1. Exposure. The documents were Phase 2. Destruction. But she was beginning to understand there would be a Phase 3. And 4. And 5. Because systems like this didn't die easily. They adapted, found new ways to protect themselves, created new Franklin Boyces to replace the ones who got caught. The fight wasn't ending. It was just beginning. She opened her laptop, started a new document. Documentation. Lakewood Development Partners Investigation. Phase 2. Outside her window, Cleveland slept. Lake Erie lay dark beneath overcast sky. Somewhere in the city, Judge Franklin Boyce was probably lying awake, wondering how his carefully constructed career had collapsed so quickly. He'd underestimated her. They all had. DEI hire playing scientist. She smiled grimly. This DEI hire had just started playing. You think a flash drive is going to save you? Brick Holloway's voice echoed through the parking garage. Level 3 this time. Kezia had changed her routine, varied her schedule, taken different routes. None of it mattered. He stood between her and the stairwell. 2 men flanked him. Younger, harder. The kind of muscle that didn't bother hiding what it was. 3 weeks since the verdict. 2 weeks since the Lakewood documents arrived. 1 week until the Board of Professional Conduct hearing. And now this. The documents won't help you. Brick walked closer. 10 feet. 8. Appeals take years. Settlements get negotiated. Judges get replaced, but the system stays the same. What do you want? What I've always wanted. For you to understand your place. He stopped 5 feet away. Close enough that she could smell his cologne. Expensive. Wrong for the threat in his eyes. You got lucky. The audio, the media circus. But luck runs out. Is that a threat? It's a promise. His smile vanished. My uncle lost his job last week. 40 years at that plant. They're calling it restructuring. We both know what it really is. Your uncle helped poison 2,400 families. Brick moved fast. His hand closed around her throat, slamming her back against the concrete pillar. Her head cracked against the surface. Stars exploded across her vision. You don't get to judge him. Low, controlled. The voice of a man who had done this before. You don't get to sit in your government office and decide who's guilty. Kezia's hands clawed at his wrist. No leverage, no air. Vision graying at the edges. Hey! Shout from somewhere distant. Footsteps running. Brick released her. She slid down the pillar, gasping, one hand pressed to her throat. This isn't over. He stepped back, gestured to his companions. Not even close. They walked away. Casual, unhurried. Men who knew no one would stop them. A security guard reached her 30 seconds later. Young, out of breath, clearly unprepared. Ma'am, are you okay? Should I call police? Kezia coughed, forced her voice to work. Yes, call them, and get your security footage. All of it. She photographed the bruises forming on her throat before officers arrived. Documented time, location, the 3 men she could now identify. Evidence. Always evidence. The system had tried to silence her with procedural manipulation. That failed. Now it was trying something more direct. They thought choking her in a parking garage would make her stop. They thought threatening her life would silence her. But Kezia Hollins had spent 14 years documenting contamination that killed children. Physical violence wasn't going to break her now. Subscribe, because what happens at the board hearing changes everything. The Board of Professional Conduct hearing was 6 days away. Judge Franklin Boyce had hired Harrison Webb, Cleveland's most expensive defense attorney. Client list that read like a who's who of powerful people who needed problems to disappear. Webb had filed 14 motions challenging various aspects of the complaint, each designed to delay, obfuscate, exhaust. The audio was authentic. 3 independent forensic analysts confirmed it. But Webb argued Chambers' conversations were privileged. Recording was obtained illegally. The board had no jurisdiction over statements made during judicial duties. Legal arguments that might or might not succeed, but would definitely take time. Time Marsh Chemical was using to negotiate. The $34 million settlement still being finalized, lawyers fighting over language, payment schedules, the precise wording of non-admission clauses. Time Judge Boyce was using to rally support. A website had appeared, judicialfairness.org, portraying him as victim of activist attacks. Dedicated public servant destroyed by people with political agendas. The narrative was shifting. Initial outrage fading into background noise of daily scandal. Kezia watched it happen with something between frustration and grim recognition. She'd been naive to think one piece of audio would permanently change anything. The system protected itself. That was what systems did. But she had the Lakewood documents now, and Flynn Weaver had made his calls. The bruises on her throat darkened over the following days, purple fading to yellow-green. She wore scarves to hide them, turtlenecks despite the warming weather. Ada called every morning and every night, checking, worrying. "You should come stay with me. Columbus is safer." "I can't leave now. The hearing is in less than a week." "The hearing will happen whether you're there or not. Your testimony isn't required for the board to act. My testimony is the foundation of the complaint. If I'm not there to answer questions, Webb will use my absence to argue I'm not credible." "And if they kill you before you can testify?" The question hung between them. Neither had said it aloud before. "They won't." Kezia's voice was steadier than she felt. "Killing me now would be the worst possible move. It would confirm everything I've said, turn me into a martyr, guarantee federal investigation." "You're assuming they're thinking rationally." "I'm assuming they're thinking about money. Marsh Chemical has $47 million at stake. Murder investigations tend to complicate settlement negotiations." Ada was silent. Then, "I'm coming to Cleveland." Ada: "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you. I'll be there Friday. We'll go to the hearing together." Kezia wanted to argue, wanted to protect her sister from whatever was coming, but the truth was, she didn't want to face it alone. "Okay, Friday. And Kezia? If anything happens before then, anything at all, you call me immediately. Promise." "I promise." The days blurred together. Testimony preparation with Clover Baines, review of documentation, anticipation of Webb's cross-examination strategies. Flynn Weaver called on Tuesday with news. The documents reached the board's investigative staff. Anonymous delivery. They're treating it as a tip requiring verification. Will they verify in time? Unknown. Board investigators move slowly, but they have subpoena power now. They can compel Lakewood to produce records independently. And if the records match what Tabitha sent? Then Boyce isn't just facing removal from the bench. He's facing criminal referral. Criminal. The word landed differently now than it had weeks ago. Before, Kezia had wanted justice for Riverside Heights, accountability for the families poisoned by Marsh Chemical's negligence. Now she wanted something more. She wanted Franklin Boyce to understand what it felt like to have his life dismantled piece by piece, to watch everything he'd built collapse around him, to know that someone he'd dismissed as unqualified had brought him down. Was that justice? Or was it revenge? She didn't know anymore, wasn't sure it mattered. Wednesday brought an unexpected visitor. Kezia was reviewing documents in her apartment when the buzzer rang. She checked the camera. A woman in her 50s, professional attire, standing alone on the front step. "Dr. Hollins, my name is Margaret Okonkwo. I'm the chair of the Board of Professional Conduct. May I come in?" Kezia's pulse spiked. The board chair making a personal visit 3 days before the hearing? Something was wrong. Or something had changed dramatically. She buzzed her in, met her at the apartment door. Margaret Okonkwo was tall, silver-haired, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades navigating institutional power. Former appellate judge, according to Kezia's research, reputation for fairness and thoroughness. "Thank you for seeing me without notice." She entered, declined the offered seat. "This isn't an official visit. I'm here in a personal capacity." "I'm not sure I understand the distinction." "The board has received new evidence. Documents suggesting Judge Boyce's misconduct extends far beyond what was initially alleged." She met Kezia's eyes directly. "I assume you know something about these documents." Kezia kept her expression neutral. "I'm aware that additional evidence exists. Evidence that was delivered anonymously to our offices. Evidence that, if authentic, transforms this case from judicial misconduct into potential criminal conspiracy." "What are you asking me exactly?" "I'm asking if you can help us verify the documents' authenticity, because if they're real, the hearing on Monday isn't just about removing a judge from the bench. It's about exposing a network of corruption that reaches into some of the most powerful institutions in Cleveland." Kezia considered her options. Admitting knowledge of the documents could complicate her position as a complainant, but refusing to help could delay verification past the hearing date. "What do you need?" "Someone who can testify to the documents' chain of custody. Someone who can explain where they came from without revealing the source's identity." "I received the documents anonymously. I can't testify to their origin because I genuinely don't know the full chain of custody." "But you reviewed them. You assessed their authenticity." "I reviewed them. I found them consistent with other evidence I've collected, but I'm not a forensic document examiner." Okonkwo nodded slowly. "The board has engaged forensic analysts. Preliminary findings suggest the documents are genuine, but we need corroboration, someone who can connect the documents to the broader pattern of conduct." "That's what my testimony on Monday is supposed to do." "Yes, which is why I'm here." She paused. "Dr. Hollins, I need to be direct with you. There are people who don't want this hearing to happen. People with significant resources and influence. The last 3 days before the hearing are when they're most likely to try something. I'm aware. I was assaulted in a parking garage last week." Okonkwo's expression flickered. "I read the police report. The investigation isn't progressing." "Investigations involving powerful defendants rarely do." "No, they don't." She reached into her bag, withdrew a card. "This is my direct number. If anything happens between now and Monday, anything at all, call me immediately. The board has certain protections we can extend to witnesses." "What kind of protections?" "Secure transportation, temporary housing, legal support if needed." She set the card on the table. "I don't want to alarm you, but I've chaired this board for 7 years. I've seen how far some people will go to protect themselves." "Judge Boyce?" "Judge Boyce. His allies. The people who benefit from having a friendly judge on the bench." She moved toward the door. "Monday at 9 a.m. Please be early. And please be careful." She left. Kezia stared at the card for a long time. 7 years as board chair. Decades as appellate judge. Margaret Okonkwo had seen everything the legal system could produce, and she was worried enough to make a personal visit. That said more than any words could. Thursday night, Ada arrived. She came with 2 suitcases, 3 boxes of files from her own research into Marsh Chemical, and the particular determination of a younger sister who had decided her role was protection, whether it was wanted or not. "I've taken a week off work. My apartment is sublet for the month. I'm staying until this is over." "Ada, that's not necessary." "It's absolutely necessary." She set her bags down, looked around the apartment. Have you been sleeping? Some. Eating? When I remember. Talking to anyone besides lawyers and journalists? Kezia didn't answer. Ada sighed. That's what I thought. Go shower. I'm making dinner. I have documents to review. You've been reviewing documents for 3 weeks. The hearing is in 3 days. Either you know the material by now or you don't. She pointed toward the bathroom. Shower, dinner, sleep. Tomorrow we can review together. Kezia wanted to argue, but Ada was right. She'd been running on adrenaline and caffeine for weeks. The exhaustion was catching up with her. She showered, ate the pasta Ada prepared, slept for the first time in days without nightmares of parking garages and hands around her throat. Friday morning, Clover Baines called with news. The board's forensic analysis is complete. The Lakewood documents are authentic, matches paper stock from 2019. Printer metadata consistent with Lakewood's corporate systems. No evidence of tampering. So they'll use them at the hearing? Better than that. The board has already shared findings with the Ohio Attorney General's office and the FBI. Kezia's breath caught. Federal involvement? The documents suggest payments crossing state lines. That makes it federal jurisdiction. Clover's voice carried something Kezia hadn't heard before. Excitement. Carefully controlled, but unmistakable. This isn't just a judicial discipline case anymore. This is a criminal investigation. Will that affect Monday's hearing? It might delay certain aspects, but the board can still act on the original complaint. The racist comments, the biased rulings. That's separate from the criminal matter. So Boyce could be removed from the bench before criminal charges are even filed? That's the hope. Kezia sat back, processed. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a witness being systematically silenced. Her testimony blocked, her credibility attacked, her safety threatened. Now the FBI was involved, the Attorney General's office. Multiple investigations converging on a man who had dismissed her as a DEI hire playing scientist. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was something. What do I need to do? Be at the board's offices Monday at 8 a.m. Testimony begins at 9. Prepare for Webb to attack aggressively. He knows this is his client's last chance. I'll be ready. One more thing. Clover paused. Margaret Okonkwo called me this morning. She's offering you witness protection through the weekend. Secure location, professional security. I have Ada with me. Ada isn't professional security. These people have already assaulted you once. Kezia looked across the apartment. Ada was at the table, reviewing documents, coffee in hand. Ready to help, ready to protect. But Clover was right. Ada wasn't equipped to handle what Brick Holloway and his associates might try. Where would I go? A hotel downtown, near the board's offices, 24-hour security, transportation to the hearing Monday morning. Can Ada come? I'll ask, but probably not. Witness protection typically doesn't extend to family members. Then no, I'm not leaving her alone. Kezia. I said no. Her voice was firm. We'll take precautions, vary routines, stay visible, but I'm not abandoning my sister to protect myself. Silence on the line. Then, okay, but promise me you'll be careful. Both of you. I promise. The weekend passed in tense vigilance. They left the apartment only when necessary. Groceries delivered. Documents reviewed indoors. Curtains drawn against prying eyes. Kezia's testimony preparation continued. Mock cross-examinations with Ada playing Webb's role, anticipating every attack angle, rehearsing responses that were truthful without being vulnerable to manipulation. Isn't it true that you have a personal vendetta against corporations? I have a professional commitment to accurate environmental data. If that data reveals corporate wrongdoing, that's a consequence of truth, not personal bias. You sought out media attention for this case. I provided documentation to a journalist after every legitimate avenue for redress had been blocked. The media attention was a consequence of Judge Boyce's conduct, not my seeking. You've admitted that you don't know the full chain of custody for the Lakewood documents. I know the documents are authentic. The board's forensic analysis confirmed that. The chain of custody question is irrelevant to their accuracy. Ada was brutal in her questioning, pushed every weakness, found every gap. By Sunday night, Kezia felt as prepared as she could be. But sleep didn't come easily. Every sound in the hallway made her tense. Every shadow outside the window made her check the locks. 3 assaults, vandalism, break-in, threats against her family. Tomorrow she would face the people responsible for all of it, and she would do it with every piece of evidence she'd spent 3 years collecting. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. Kezia dressed in her most professional suit, navy blue, conservative cut, the armor of credibility. Ada helped with her hair, covering the fading bruises on her neck with concealer and a strategically placed scarf. "You look like someone who's about to win," Ada said. "I look like someone who's about to fight." Same thing. They took a rideshare to the board's offices. Downtown Cleveland, 19th floor of a building that had been modern in the 1980s and had aged into institutional respectability. The hearing room was smaller than Kezia expected. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, long table where 5 board members sat with folders and laptops and expressions of professional neutrality. Margaret Okonkwo presided. Her eyes found Kezia's as she entered, offered a barely perceptible nod. Judge Boyce sat at the respondent's table with Harrison Webb beside him. He looked smaller than he had on the bench, diminished somehow. The authority of his robes replaced by the vulnerability of a man facing judgment. Webb, by contrast, radiated controlled aggression. Expensive suit, perfect hair. The posture of someone who had made careers out of defending the indefensible. Assistant Attorney General Diane Mercer represented the state. 45. Sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The state had taken over prosecution after the media coverage made, ignoring the case impossible. The gallery held maybe 30 people, reporters, attorneys, a few Riverside Heights residents who had made the trip downtown. Mrs. Patterson sat in the front row, rosary beads in weathered hands. Okonkwo called the proceedings to order. This hearing concerns complaint number 2, 025-JC-0847, filed against Judge Franklin Boyce of the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas. The complaint alleges judicial misconduct including failure to recuse, demonstrated bias, and conduct unbecoming a judicial officer. She turned to Webb. 2. Respondent's counsel, please enter your appearance. Harrison Webb, for Judge Franklin Boyce. We are prepared to present evidence that these allegations are without merit and should be dismissed. Complainant? Mercer stood. Diane Mercer for the state of Ohio. We are prepared to present evidence that Judge Boyce engaged in a pattern of misconduct that undermines public confidence in the judiciary. Very well. Ms. Mercer, you may proceed. Mercer approached the podium with the calm precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Members of the board, we will demonstrate that Judge Franklin Boyce failed to disclose significant financial conflicts of interest in the matter of Riverside Heights residents versus Marsh Chemical Corporation. We will demonstrate that he made repeated rulings designed to favor the defense, rulings that cannot be explained by legitimate legal reasoning, and we will present audio evidence of racial bias that calls into question his ability to serve impartially. She paused. Let the words settle. But that's not all. Webb shifted in his seat. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture tightened. In the course of preparing for this hearing, the board's investigative staff received additional documentation suggesting that Judge Boyce's conflicts of interest extend far beyond his wife's board membership at Lakewood Development Partners. Objection? Webb was on his feet. This is the first we're hearing of additional documentation. We haven't been provided discovery. The documents were received by board staff 6 days ago, Okonkwo said. They were authenticated and copies sent to your office Thursday morning. We received no such copies. I have delivery confirmation here. Mercer held up a paper. Delivered to your office at 8:47 a.m. Thursday. Signed by your paralegal. Webb's face reddened. He turned to whisper to an associate who began frantically scrolling through a laptop. We'll take a 15-minute recess for Respondents' Counsel to review materials, Okonkwo said. When we return, I expect everyone prepared to proceed. The recess stretched to 45 minutes. When proceedings resumed, Webb looked like a man who had swallowed something deeply unpleasant. Chair Okonkwo, respondent moves for continuance to allow adequate time to review and respond to newly disclosed documents. On what grounds? The documents allege conduct far beyond the original complaint's scope. My client is entitled to adequate preparation time. The documents relate to the same underlying matter, Judge Boyce's financial interests and the Marsh Chemical case. They expand scope but don't change fundamental allegations. Okonkwo's voice was firm. Motion denied. We will proceed. Webb sat heavily, whispered something to Boyce that made the judge's jaw clench. Mercer resumed. Members of the board, the documents in question are board meeting minutes from Lakewood Development Partners, dated January through March 2019. They show that Judge Franklin Boyce served as a paid consultant to Lakewood during a period when the company was acquiring properties from Marsh Chemical at below-market prices. She clicked a remote. A document appeared on the screen. Board minutes with Boyce's name highlighted. These minutes reference judicial consultation on matters relating to environmental liability management. They show payments of $15,000 per meeting to Judge Boyce for what the documents describe as legal guidance. Another click. A payment schedule. Over 7 months, Judge Boyce received $105,000 from Lakewood Development Partners. This was not disclosed on his financial statements, not disclosed when he was assigned to the Marsh Chemical case, not disclosed at any point during proceedings. The hearing room was silent. Even Webb seemed stunned by the documentation laid out before him. We will present evidence that Judge Boyce was not merely negligent in failing to recuse himself. He was actively involved in a scheme to profit from contaminated properties while using his judicial position to protect parties responsible for that contamination. Webb found his voice. Objection. These are serious criminal allegations beyond the board's jurisdiction. We are not here to determine criminal liability, Okonkwo said. We are here to determine whether Judge Boyce violated the Code of Judicial Conduct. The documents are relevant. Overruled. Mercer continued. For 3 hours, she built a case devastating in its precision. Financial records. Email correspondence. Meeting minutes. The chamber's audio played in full, with transcript analysis showing the pattern of racial bias. And witness after witness. Attorneys who had appeared before Boyce, litigants who had noticed patterns, people who had been afraid to speak until now. Kezia watched Judge Boyce shrink as hours passed. The man who had wielded bench power like a weapon, who had looked at her credentials and seen only a DEI hire, who had laughed about her expertise while publicly blocking her testimony. That man was being dismantled piece by piece. He thought his connections would protect him. He thought his 22 years on the bench meant something. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Subscribe now, because Kezia's testimony is about to blow this case wide open. The state calls Dr. Kezia Hollins. Kezia rose, walked to the witness seat, took the oath with steady voice and steady hands. Mercer approached with her notes. Professional, precise. Dr. Hollins, please state your qualifications for the record. I hold a doctorate in environmental science from Ohio State University. I've been a senior environmental engineer with the Ohio EPA for 14 years. I've served as expert witness in 11 federal court cases, with 0 successful challenges to my methodology. I've published peer-reviewed research on groundwater contamination in 2 major environmental science journals. And what was your role in the Marsh Chemical litigation? I was subpoenaed as an expert witness based on soil analysis I conducted in the Riverside Heights neighborhood. My samples showed trichloroethylene contamination at levels 14 times above EPA maximum contaminant limits. Can you describe what happened when you attempted to testify about those findings? Kezia looked at the board members. 5 faces waiting for truth. Every time I approached the contamination timeline, specifically the period between 2019 and 2021, defense counsel raised objections. Judge Boyce sustained every single one. Over the course of my testimony, I documented 38 sustained objections. 31 occurred when I attempted to discuss the timeline. And why was that timeline significant? Because 2019 to 2021 was the period when Marsh Chemical was negotiating land deals with Lakewood development partners, the period when they knew about contamination and hid it, the period that established their liability. The same period covered by the Lakewood documents we've reviewed today. Yes. Did you have any interactions with Judge Boyce outside the courtroom? I did not, but I had interactions with individuals who I believe were acting on behalf of parties connected to him. Can you describe those interactions? Kezia detailed everything: the assault in the courthouse hallway, the vandalized car, the break-in, the photograph of Ada, the choking in the parking garage. The hearing room was silent. Dr. Hollins, did you receive the audio recording of Judge Boyce's chambers comments? I did. How? It was given to me anonymously by someone with access to chambers conversations. And when you heard that recording, what was your reaction? Kezia paused, chose her words carefully. I felt recognition. Everything that had confused me during the trial, the systematic objections, the hostile rulings, the sense that I was being buried regardless of my qualifications, suddenly made sense. Judge Boyce wasn't evaluating my testimony on its merits. He was evaluating me on my race and gender, and he had decided before I ever took the stand that nothing I said would matter. He called you a DEI hire playing scientist. Yes. How did that make you feel? Webb stood. Objection. The witness's feelings are not relevant to whether Judge Boyce violated judicial conduct rules. Okonkwo considered. Overruled. The impact of judicial bias on witnesses is directly relevant to whether that bias undermines public confidence in the judiciary. Kezia continued. 14 years. I've spent 14 years building a career on accurate data and proper methodology. I've testified in federal court 11 times. I've helped hold corporations accountable for environmental damage that was killing people. And Judge Boyce looked at all of that and saw nothing. Just another person who didn't deserve to be taken seriously because of how she looked. She paused. That's not just offensive, it's dangerous. Because if judges can dismiss qualified experts based on racial bias, then the entire system of justice becomes a tool for protecting people with power against people without it. The room was silent. Mercer nodded. No further questions. Webb approached for cross-examination. His manner was controlled, surgical, the desperation of his position hidden behind decades of courtroom performance. Dr. Hollins, you have a personal grudge against Judge Boyce, don't you? I have a professional interest in seeing justice done. He called you names in a private conversation. That must have been painful. It was illuminating. It explained why he had been blocking my testimony despite its validity. But it also made you angry. It made me determined. Determined to destroy his career. Determined to ensure 2,400 families received justice. Judge Boyce's career was destroyed by his own conduct, not my determination. Webb paused, regrouped. You sought out media attention, gave interviews, became a public figure. I gave one interview to a journalist already covering the case. Everything else was response to media requests I didn't initiate. You're enjoying this, aren't you? The attention, the celebrity? Kezia looked at Webb, looked at Boyce behind him, slumped in his chair. Mr. Webb, I have bruises on my throat from being choked in a parking garage. I have photographs of my vandalized car, my broken apartment door, my sister being surveilled. I have documented 17 separate incidents of harassment and intimidation since I first testified. She leaned forward. Does that sound like something someone enjoys? Webb had no follow-up. You've admitted you don't know the full chain of custody for the Lakewood documents. I know the documents are authentic. The board's forensic analysis confirmed that. But you can't testify to their origin. I can testify to their contents, and their contents show that Judge Boyce was paid $105,000 to provide legal guidance to a company that was buying contaminated land at discount prices. That's not interpretation. That's documented fact. Facts can be manufactured. Documents can be forged. The board's forensic analysts disagree. Paper stock matches 2019. Printer metadata matches Lakewood systems. No evidence of tampering. The analysts could be wrong. Then present your own analysis. You've had 6 days to hire forensic experts. Where are they? Webb's jaw tightened. He had no experts, hadn't had time to engage them. The document's arrival had been perfectly timed to prevent adequate defense preparation. No further questions. The board deliberated for 4 hours. Kezia waited in the hallway with Ada and Mrs. Patterson. No one spoke much. The weight of what was happening pressed down on all of them. At 3:47, the board reconvened. Margaret Okonkwo's face was grave. In the matter of complaint number 2025-JC-0847, the board finds as follows. She read from a prepared statement. The board finds clear and convincing evidence that Judge Franklin Boyce violated Ohio Code of Judicial Conduct Rule 2.11a by failing to disqualify himself from a proceeding in which his impartiality might reasonably be questioned. Boyce's head dropped. The board finds clear and convincing evidence that Judge Boyce violated Rule 1.2 by engaging in conduct that undermines confidence in the judiciary, specifically through documented racial bias in chambers conversations. The board finds clear and convincing evidence that Judge Boyce violated Rule 3.1 by accepting compensation for legal consultation from entities with business before his court, without disclosure. Okonkwo looked up from the paper, directly at Boyce. Based on these findings, the board recommends to the Ohio Supreme Court that Judge Franklin Boyce be permanently removed from the bench. Further, the board refers evidence of potential criminal conduct to the Ohio Attorney General and the U.S. Department of Justice for investigation. The hearing room erupted. Reporters scrambled for phones. Attorneys exchanged shocked glances. Even Mercer looked slightly stunned by the severity. Permanent removal, not suspension, not reprimand, removal. Webb was on his feet. Chair Okonkwo, this is grossly excessive. My client has served this state for 22 years. Your client has betrayed this state for at least 6 of those years. Okonkwo's voice cut through the chaos. The recommendation stands. Judge Boyce may appeal through appropriate channels. The gavel fell. Kezia sat in the gallery, watching Boyce being led out by his attorneys. Watching the man who had called her a DEI hire playing scientist finally face consequences. Mrs. Patterson reached over, took her hand, squeezed. You did it, baby. We did it. No. The old woman's eyes were bright with tears. You did. Remember that. When they try to take credit or spread blame or pretend they were on your side all along, remember who actually stood up. Kezia squeezed back, didn't trust herself to speak. The aftermath was tsunami force. Ohio Supreme Court accepted the board's recommendation within 72 hours. Judge Franklin Boyce was permanently removed from the bench, the first such removal in the state's modern history. Criminal investigations accelerated. The FBI convened a grand jury. The Attorney General's office issued subpoenas to Lakewood Development Partners, Marsh Chemical, and a dozen associated entities. Brick Holloway was arrested on federal witness tampering charges. The parking garage assault was caught on security camera, the same cameras Officer Malloy had claimed were non-operational. Someone had preserved the footage. Someone who understood its value. Gordon Aldrich faced disciplinary proceedings from the state bar. His chamber's conversations with Boyce demonstrated coordination that violated attorney conduct rules. He wasn't disbarred, not yet, but his reputation was destroyed. Sherry Aldrich's whisper campaign collapsed under the weight of documented evidence. The women who had spread rumors about Kezia's credibility now faced social consequences of their own. Cleveland's professional circles had long memories, and being on the wrong side of this case was becoming toxic. The Marsh Chemical settlement was finalized in August. $34 million to the plaintiff class, $12 million more for environmental remediation, medical monitoring for affected residents, property buyouts for those who wanted to leave. Not enough. It would never be enough for Mrs. Patterson, who had buried her son and still lived with her own illness. For children who would carry elevated lead levels for the rest of their lives. For the community slowly poisoned while responsible parties counted profits. But it was something. The judge who called her a DEI hire lost his career. The corporation that poisoned thousands paid millions. The people who threatened her family faced federal charges. But Kezia Hollins wasn't done yet. Subscribe, because what happens next proves that one person really can change the system. 3 months after the board hearing, Kezia received a letter. Official stationery. Ohio Supreme Court seal. In the matter of disciplinary proceedings against Franklin Boyce, the court hereby accepts the Board of Professional Conduct's recommendation for permanent removal from judicial office, effective immediately. Judge Boyce is further ordered to surrender his law license pending outcome of criminal proceedings. Permanent removal. License surrendered. It was over. Not the criminal investigation. That would take years. Not the civil lawsuits. Those were multiplying. Not the systemic problems. Those would outlast any individual judge. But Franklin Boyce would never sit on a bench again. Would never block another witness. Would never look at another black woman's credentials and see only someone to dismiss. She photographed the letter, saved it to her files, then called Ada. "It's done. He's out." Silence. Then, "You won." "We won. Mrs. Patterson, the families, everyone who came forward." "And you." Ada's voice was soft but insistent. "Don't pretend you weren't the center of it. I was the person who documented what was happening, that's all. That's everything. Most people see injustice and look away. You saw it and wrote it down, and kept writing until someone had to pay attention. Anyone could have done that. But they didn't. You did." The federal grand jury convened in November. Sealed proceedings. 23 citizens listening as prosecutors walked them through months of investigation. Each case documented. Each victim named. Each piece of evidence authenticated. The presentation took 3 days. Witnesses testified. Community members who were falsely targeted. Journalists who documented patterns. Digital forensics experts who explained how Boyce's financial connections were traced. On day 3, the grand jury watched recovered footage from the parking garage assault. Brick Holloway's hands around Kezia's throat, his associates standing guard, and then the chamber's audio. Boyce's voice clear as daylight. Another DEI hire playing scientist. Credentials don't mean competence. The grand jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, they handed prosecutors a sealed envelope. True bills on all counts. Franklin Boyce was indicted on 3 federal charges: conspiracy to defraud the United States, honest services fraud, and bribery. 4 executives from Lakewood Development Partners faced similar charges. 2 officials from Marsh Chemical were named as unindicted co-conspirators. The indictments were announced on the courthouse steps. Kezia watched from her apartment, news coverage playing on her laptop while she worked on a new case. Different company, different contamination, same pattern of denial and deflection. The U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio stood at the podium. These charges represent a comprehensive effort to hold accountable those who corrupted public institutions for private gain. Judge Boyce used his position to protect polluters while profiting from their activities. The families of Riverside Heights deserved better. The people of Ohio deserved better. Our justice system deserves better. Standard press conference language. But true. Tabitha Oakes called that evening. First contact since the brief conversation months ago. "I saw the news." "So did I." 24 years. Her voice was quiet. I sat in that courtroom for 24 years watching him do things I knew were wrong. Told myself it wasn't my place to speak. I was just the court reporter, just the person who wrote things down. You did speak, when it mattered. Should have spoken sooner. You spoke when you could. That's all any of us can do. Silence. Then, the FBI contacted me. They want me to testify in the criminal trial. Will you? Yes. No hesitation. I've spent my whole career writing other people's words. Time to use my own. I'm glad. I never thanked you for protecting my identity, for not giving me up when they pressured you. You protected yourself by giving me the documents anonymously. I just respected that choice. Still, thank you. Thank you. None of this happens without what you documented. Silence. Longer this time. Do you think it matters? Tabitha's voice was suddenly vulnerable. All of this, investigation, charges, removal, does it actually change anything? Or does the system just adapt, find new ways to protect itself? Kezia thought about the question. The honest answer was that she didn't know. Systems did adapt. Power did perpetuate itself. The same patterns that had allowed Boyce to thrive would create new Boyces, new schemes, new corruptions. But Mrs. Patterson's grandson is going to college next year, first in his family. The settlement money made that possible. That's one person. One person who'll have opportunities he wouldn't have had otherwise, who might become a lawyer or engineer or judge, who might remember where he came from and fight for people like his grandmother. Kezia paused. I don't know if what we did changes the system permanently, but I know it changed some lives, and those changed lives will change other lives. Maybe, eventually, enough changes accumulate that the system can't stay the same. That's a lot of faith in people. It's faith in documentation. I write things down. Other people read them. Sometimes they act. That's the only theory of change I have. Tabitha laughed, tired but genuine. 24 years of writing things down, and it took a scientist to remind me why it matters. We're all just recording what we see, hoping someone listens. Yeah, I guess we are. 6 months later, Franklin Boyce pleaded guilty to 3 federal charges in exchange for reduced sentence. 4 years in federal prison, 3 years supervised release. At his sentencing hearing, he read a statement expressing remorse for mistakes in judgment that had fallen short of standards expected of a judicial officer. He did not apologize to Riverside Heights families, did not acknowledge the racism captured on audio, did not admit his conduct had been anything more than technical violations. Kezia watched the sentencing on television. Same apartment, same coffee cup, same view of Cleveland's skyline. 4 years. For a scheme that poisoned 2,400 families and enabled millions in ill-gotten profits. Not enough. Never enough. But she'd learned that justice wasn't a destination. It was a process. Slow, imperfect, frustrating, and worth fighting for anyway. She returned to work at Ohio EPA the following Monday. New cases waited. New contaminations to investigate. New communities counting on someone to document what was happening. Her supervisor called her into his office. The director wants to commend you publicly. What you did for Riverside Heights, it's exactly what this agency should be doing. But the calls haven't stopped. Questions about your judgment. Marsh Chemical has friends. They're not going to forget this. Neither am I. She kept her job, kept testifying, kept documenting. But she was on a list now, the kind that didn't get written down. Flynn Weaver released a follow-up podcast episode, updates on the case, settlement, ongoing investigations. The Marsh Chemical settlement is victory for Riverside Heights, but larger questions remain unanswered. How many other cases has Judge Boyce presided over? How many witnesses were silenced? The Board of Professional Conduct has received 43 additional complaints since our original episode. 43. The investigation is expanding. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning to be told. Mrs. Patterson died in February. Kezia learned from the obituary in The Plain Dealer. Delilah May Patterson, 68, retired teacher, beloved mother and grandmother, preceded in death by her son Marcus. The funeral was held at a small church in Riverside Heights. Kezia sat in the back row, watching the community gather to honor a woman who had spent her final years fighting for justice she would never fully see. The pastor spoke about faith and perseverance, about hope in the face of suffering, about the belief that truth would eventually prevail. After the service, Mrs. Patterson's grandson approached Kezia. 19 years old, first year at Cleveland State, studying environmental science. She talked about you all the time, said you were the one who finally made them listen. Your grandmother made them listen. I just provided the documentation. She said you'd say that. He smiled, his grandmother's smile, warm and knowing. She also said to tell you something, if I ever got the chance. What's that? Keep swimming. Kezia's eyes burned. She blinked rapidly. I will. She believed in you, even when it looked hopeless, even when they were winning. She said you were the kind of person who didn't know how to give up. I learned from her. The young man nodded, shook her hand, walked back to his family. Kezia stood in the church parking lot for a long time after, watching the community disperse, watching the next generation take up burdens their elders had carried too long. Mrs. Patterson was gone, but her grandson was going to college, studying environmental science, learning to document contamination and fight for justice. The work continued. It always continued. 1 year after the board hearing, Kezia received an unexpected invitation. The Ohio State Bar Association wanted to honor her with their annual Public Service Award, recognition for exceptional courage in exposing judicial corruption and advocating for environmental justice. She almost declined. The attention made her uncomfortable. The praise felt unearned when so many others had contributed. Ada talked her into accepting. You need to be visible. The people who tried to silence you, they want you to disappear. They want the story to fade. Every time you show up, every time you accept recognition, you remind everyone that they failed. It feels like taking credit I don't deserve. It feels like you're not used to winning. Get used to it. The ceremony was held in Columbus. Black tie affair. Judges and attorneys and politicians gathered to celebrate achievements in legal profession. Kezia wore a simple black dress. No jewelry except her grandmother's beaded bracelet. The award presenter was Margaret Okonkwo. Dr. Kezia Hollins exemplifies the best of what our legal system can produce. Not a lawyer herself, but someone who understood that justice requires truth, and truth requires documentation. When powerful forces tried to silence her, she kept speaking. When they tried to discredit her, she kept documenting. When they tried to threaten her into submission, she kept fighting. Okonkwo paused. Judge Franklin Boyce called her a DEI hire playing scientist. He meant it as an insult. But Dr. Hollins turned those words into a rallying cry. She proved that credentials matter, that expertise matters, that truth matters, even when powerful people don't want to hear it. Applause filled the ballroom. Kezia approached the podium, looked out at the crowd. I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because 2,400 families were being poisoned, and no one in power seemed to care. I did it because a judge looked at my credentials and saw only my race and gender. I did it because the system that was supposed to protect vulnerable people was being used to protect the people harming them. She paused. I'm not a hero. I'm an environmental engineer who documents contamination. I write things down. I follow protocols. I testify about what the data shows. But I've learned something in the past year. Documentation is power. When you write things down, when you preserve evidence, maintain chain of custody, create records that can't be denied, you take power away from people who depend on silence and secrecy. Judge Boyce thought he could dismiss me because of how I looked. He thought his position and connections would protect him from consequences. He was wrong. Not because I'm exceptional, but because I refuse to be silent. Because I documented everything. Because when the moment came, I had evidence that couldn't be ignored. That's all any of us can do. Document, preserve, testify, and hope that eventually the weight of truth becomes impossible to deny. She lifted the award. This belongs to everyone who spoke up. To Tabitha Oakes, who risked her career to record the truth. To Mrs. Delilah Patterson, who didn't live to see full justice, but never stopped believing it was possible. To the families of Riverside Heights, who are still fighting for the health and safety they deserve. And to everyone who's ever been told they don't belong, that their credentials don't matter, that they're not qualified to speak truth to power. She looked directly into the camera broadcasting the ceremony. You are qualified. Your voice matters. Document everything, and never ever stop fighting. The applause was thunderous. What? He called her unqualified. He dismissed her expertise. He tried to bury her testimony and destroy her career. Franklin Boyce thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. Dr. Kezia Hollins is still at the Ohio EPA. She's testified in 7 more cases since Riverside Heights. Each time, she faces skepticism and pushback. Each time, she keeps documenting. Tabitha Oakes is writing her memoir. 24 years of watching the justice system from inside its walls. The things she saw. The things she recorded. The things that might finally be told. The fight for Riverside Heights is over. The fight for justice continues. If this story meant something to you, share it. Not for likes or subscribers. For the reminder that documentation matters. That truth matters. That one person with the courage to write things down can change everything. Kezia stood at her apartment window, watching the Cleveland skyline at sunset. Lake Erie reflected orange and gold against the darkening sky. The same water that had once caught fire now held the colors of something almost like hope. On her desk, a new case file waited. Different company, different contamination. Same patterns of denial and deflection. She thought about Mrs. Patterson's words from what felt like a lifetime ago. They'll come for you the way they came for us. Slow at first, then all at once. And by the time you see it clearly, you'll already be drowning. I can swim, she'd said. She had. Through threats and violence and institutional obstruction. Through a system designed to protect the powerful and silence the weak. She'd swum, and she'd reached the other side, not unscathed. The bruises had healed, but the memories remained. The knowledge that people with money and power would always try to crush anyone who threatened their interests. But she'd also learned something else. They could be beaten. Not easily, not quickly, not without cost. But they could be beaten. She sat down at her desk, opened the new case file. Documentation. Patterson Creek Industrial Site. Initial assessment. The work continued. It always continued. And somewhere in Cleveland, a retired court reporter was writing her memoir. A young man was studying environmental science. A community was slowly healing. The system hadn't changed overnight. It probably never would. But it had bent. Just a little. Just enough to let light through. And sometimes, that was all you could ask for. You think this ends with one judge? The voice came through the phone at 3 a.m., 18 months after Franklin Boyce began his federal prison sentence. Kezia sat up in bed, heart pounding, hand fumbling for the lamp switch. Unknown number. Blocked caller ID. Who is this? Someone who's been watching. Someone who knows what you did to Frank wasn't justice. It was assassination. I'm hanging up. Hang up and you'll miss what's coming. We've been patient, waiting for attention to fade, waiting for you to feel safe again. A pause. Cold. Deliberate. You're not safe, Dr. Hollins. You never were. The line went dead. Kezia stared at her phone. Screen glowing 3:17 a.m. in pale blue light. 18 months of relative peace. 18 months of rebuilding. 18 months of believing the worst was over. She should have known better. They waited 18 months. They let her think she'd won. They let her guard down. Now they're coming back, and this time, they're not sending warnings. Subscribe now, because what happens next proves the fight was never really over. She didn't sleep the rest of that night. By 5 a.m., she had documented the call. Time, duration, exact words as best she could remember. Saved the phone log showing the blocked number. Added it to the file she'd maintained since the Boyce case ended, the one titled Ongoing Threats that she'd hoped would remain empty. By 6, she was on the phone with Agent Torres at the FBI field office. Dr. Hollins, it's been a while. I received a threatening call 3 hours ago. Anonymous, blocked number. They referenced Boyce specifically, said I wasn't safe. Silence on the line. Torres processing. Can you come in today? We should discuss this in person. I have testimony scheduled at 9. Patterson Creek contamination case. After that, then. 2 p.m.? I'll be there. She showered, dressed in her professional armor, navy suit, sensible heels, hair pulled back in the neat twist that had become her courtroom uniform, checked the locks on her apartment door twice, looked out the window at the street below, scanning for unfamiliar vehicles, watching figures. Nothing obvious. Nothing she could point to and say there, that's the threat. But the feeling of being watched had returned. The weight of invisible eyes that she'd almost forgotten over 18 months of normalcy. They were patient, the voice had said, waiting for attention to fade. The attention had faded. The media had moved on to other scandals. The Boyce case was history now, a cautionary tale mentioned in legal ethics seminars, a Wikipedia entry that would slowly gather dust. Perfect timing for revenge. The Patterson Creek case was different from Riverside Heights. Smaller scale, only 340 families affected. Different contaminant, hexavalent chromium instead of trichloroethylene. Different defendant, a metal plating company instead of a chemical corporation. But the patterns were the same. Corporate knowledge of contamination, delayed disclosure, regulatory capture. Communities poisoned while responsible parties calculated whether cleanup costs exceeded lawsuit settlements. Judge Hazel Odom presided, the same visiting judge who had taken over the Marsh chemical case after Boyce's removal. She ran her courtroom with military precision, no favoritism, no backroom coordination, no sustained objections designed to bury inconvenient testimony. Kezia had testified before her 3 times now. Each time, she'd been allowed to explain what her findings meant. Each time, the jury had heard the full picture. It was how the system was supposed to work. Today's testimony was routine, chain of custody documentation, sampling methodology, contamination levels compared to EPA standards. But she couldn't focus. The voice from 3 a.m. echoed in her head. You're not safe. You never were. Dr. Hollins? She blinked. The plaintiff's attorney, a young woman named Iris Delgado who reminded Kezia of herself 15 years ago, was waiting for an answer. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I asked about the temporal distribution of contamination. When did levels first exceed EPA limits? Kezia gathered herself, pushed the threatening call to the back of her mind, focused on the data. Based on core samples taken at varying depths, contamination first exceeded EPA maximum contaminant levels approximately 7 years ago. The chromium-6 concentrations increased steadily over the following 4 years before plateauing at current levels. And what does that timeline suggest about the source? The temporal and spatial distribution is consistent with a single-point source releasing contaminants over an extended period. The plume migration pattern indicates the source is located at or near the defendant's facility. Defense counsel objected. Judge Odom overruled. The testimony continued. By noon, Kezia had completed her direct examination. Cross was scheduled for after lunch. She used the break to check her phone. 3 missed calls from Ada, 2 from Flynn Weaver. 1 from a number she didn't recognize, different from the 3 a.m. caller, a Cleveland area code. She called Ada first. Are you okay? Her sister's voice was tight with worry. I've been trying to reach you all morning. I'm fine. I was in court. What's wrong? Someone called me, at work, asked questions about you, where you live now, whether you are still testifying, who you're close to. Kezia's blood went cold. What did you tell them? Nothing. I hung up and called security. But Kezia, they knew things. They knew I'm your sister. They knew where I work. They mentioned Mom's maiden name. Personal information. The kind that required research. The kind that suggested organized surveillance, not random threats. Did you report it to police? I filed a report. They said they'd look into it. Same thing they said last time. Ada's voice cracked. It's happening again, isn't it? I don't know. Maybe. You need to be careful. More careful than last time. I know. Do you? Because last time you almost got killed. Last time they choked you in a parking garage and you still kept going. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. You could stop testifying, get a different job, move somewhere they can't find you. And let them win? Let them win versus let them kill you? Yes, I choose you alive over you being right. Kezia closed her eyes. Her sister's fear was palpable even through the phone, the same fear she'd heard 18 months ago, when the threats were constant and the danger was immediate. I'll be careful, I promise. That's what you said before. And I survived. Barely. Surviving is enough. It has to be. Ada was silent for a long moment. Then, call me tonight, every night until this is over. Promise me. I promise. The FBI field office occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown tower that had been built with federal money and federal aesthetics, institutional, anonymous, designed to project authority without personality. Agent Torres met her in a conference room on the 27th floor. She was younger than Kezia remembered, early 40s, dark hair going gray at the temples, the particular exhaustion of someone who spent their career fighting battles that never stayed won. Tell me about the call. Kezia recounted everything, the exact time, the words, the tone, controlled, confident, the voice of someone who believed they held all the cards. They mentioned Boyce specifically? They said what I did to Frank wasn't justice, used his first name, like they knew him personally. Torres made notes. Anyone from Boyce's circle who might hold a grudge? His entire circle holds a grudge. His wife, his former clerks, the attorneys he protected, the corporations that benefited from his rulings. Kezia paused. Brick Holloway is still in prison, but he has family, associates. We've been monitoring Holloway's communications, nothing suggesting coordination with outside parties. What about Gordon Aldrich? Disbarred last year, living in Florida now. No indication he's involved in anything related to you. So we have no idea who made the call. Not yet. We're working on tracing it, but blocked numbers from burner phones rarely lead anywhere useful. Torres set down her pen. Dr. Hollins, I have to be honest with you. Without specific, actionable threats, there's limited protection we can offer. The call was a threat. The call was intimidation. There's a legal distinction. A distinction that means nothing if they actually hurt me. I understand your frustration. Believe me. Torres leaned forward. But we can't assign protective details based on anonymous phone calls. We don't have the resources. What we can do is increase surveillance on known associates of Boyce who might have motive. Monitor communications. Watch for patterns. Watch for patterns. Kezia's voice was flat. While they watch me. It's not ideal, but it's what we have. Kezia stood, gathered her bag. When Brick Holloway choked me in that parking garage, I filed reports. Nothing happened. When they broke into my apartment and left a photograph of my sister, I filed reports. Nothing happened. When someone made threatening calls to Ada's workplace, I filed reports. Nothing happened. She met Torres's eyes. At what point does nothing happened become something happened enough for actual protection? When there's an imminent, credible threat to your life. And how do you determine that? Usually when the threat becomes an attempt. So I have to almost die before you'll help me not die." Torres didn't answer. Her silence was answer enough. Kezia left the FBI office and walked into a Cleveland afternoon that felt suddenly hostile. Every face on the street was a potential threat. Every car that slowed near her was a possible weapon. 18 months of peace. 18 months of believing she'd won. The voice had been right. She'd never been safe. She'd just been waiting. The next 3 weeks brought escalation. Small things at first. Her car's tires slashed in the courthouse parking garage, the same garage where Brick Holloway had attacked her. No security footage. Budget cuts, they said. Then her mailbox, stuffed with photographs of her daily routine, leaving her apartment, entering the courthouse, buying coffee at the shop on Euclid Avenue. No note, no explicit threat, just evidence of surveillance. Then her office at Ohio EPA. Someone had accessed her computer after hours. Files opened and closed without modification. The IT department couldn't determine who. The access came from her own credentials, which had been mysteriously borrowed from the authentication system. Each incident documented. Each incident reported. Each incident met with the same bureaucratic helplessness. "We're investigating, Dr. Hollins. We take this seriously, Dr. Hollins. We'll let you know if we find anything, Dr. Hollins." They never found anything. They never would. Flynn Weaver called during the 3rd week. "I've been hearing rumors. People asking questions about you in legal circles. Quiet inquiries about your current cases, your testimony schedule, your home address." "What kind of people?" "I don't know. That's what worries me. The usual suspects, Boyce's allies, Marsh Chemical's PR team, they've gone quiet. These inquiries are coming from somewhere else." "Where?" "I'm trying to find out. But someone is building a file on you, a comprehensive one. The kind of file you build when you're planning something." "Planning what?" "That's the question, isn't it?" The answer came on a Tuesday afternoon. Kezia was leaving the courthouse after testimony in the Patterson Creek case. The cross-examination had been brutal but unsuccessful, the defense attorney's attacks on her methodology falling flat against documented protocols. She walked toward the parking garage. Same route she'd taken dozens of times. Same awareness of her surroundings she'd developed after Brick Holloway's attack. The van came out of nowhere. White, no plates. Sliding door already open. 2 men grabbed her before she could scream. One covered her mouth. The other lifted her feet. They threw her into the van's cargo area. The door slammed shut. The van accelerated. Everything went dark. She woke in a room she didn't recognize. Concrete walls. Single fluorescent light. No windows. A metal chair bolted to the floor. The chair she was sitting in, wrists zip-tied to the armrests. Her head throbbed. Chloroform, probably. Or something similar. The chemical taste still lingered at the back of her throat. How long had she been unconscious? Minutes? Hours? The fluorescent light gave no indication of time. She tested the zip ties. Tight, but not circulation cutting. Whoever had restrained her knew what they were doing. Enough to immobilize, not enough to cause immediate damage. Professional. That was more frightening than amateur. A door opened behind her. Footsteps approached. Dr. Hollins, finally awake. The voice from the phone call. She recognized it now. A man, older, the particular cadence of someone accustomed to authority. He walked around to face her. 65, maybe 70. Silver hair. Expensive suit. The kind of man who would blend seamlessly into any corporate boardroom or country club. "Do you know who I am?" "Should I?" "My name is Wallace Drummond. I'm the managing partner at Drummond & Associates. We handle certain sensitive matters for clients who prefer discretion." Kezia's mind raced. Drummond & Associates. She'd heard the name before, a law firm that operated in the shadows, handling cases that never made it to public dockets. "You're the one who made the call. I'm the one who's been watching. Ever since you destroyed Franklin Boyce, a man I personally vouched for when he was appointed to the bench. Boyce destroyed himself. Boyce made mistakes, human mistakes, the kind that could have been handled quietly if you hadn't decided to become a crusader. He called me a DEI hire playing scientist. He blocked my testimony to protect a corporation that was poisoning children. That's not a mistake, that's corruption. Drummond smiled. The smile didn't reach his eyes. Corruption is such an ugly word. I prefer alignment of interests. Franklin understood that certain institutions need to be protected, that certain people who keep the economy running, who provide jobs and stability, deserve consideration when they appear in his courtroom. Consideration that cost 2,400 families their health. Riverside Heights was unfortunate, but settlements were paid, remediation is underway, the system worked. The system worked because I made it work, because I documented everything Boyce tried to bury. Yes, that's exactly the problem. Drummond pulled a chair from somewhere behind her, positioned it directly in front of her, sat down with the casual ease of someone conducting a job interview. You disrupted a carefully maintained balance. You exposed arrangements that had functioned smoothly for decades. Do you have any idea how much damage you caused? I caused damage? To what? To the networks that keep this city running. The relationships between business and government that ensure Cleveland doesn't collapse into the same decay that's consumed other Rust Belt cities. He leaned forward. Franklin Boyce wasn't an anomaly. He was part of a system that you've now made everyone afraid to participate in. Kezia felt cold understanding settle in her chest. How many others are there? How many judges? That's not your concern. How many? Drummond studied her for a long moment. Enough. Enough to ensure that business can be conducted without interference from zealots like yourself. This is why you took me, to find out what I know about the others. Partly, we need to understand how deep your investigation went, what documents you have, who you've shared them with. And then what? You kill me? That depends entirely on your cooperation. Drummond's voice was calm, reasonable. The voice of a man discussing quarterly projections, not murder. We're not barbarians, Dr. Hollins. We don't want violence. We want resolution, a way forward that serves everyone's interests. My interests include not being kidnapped. Your interests include surviving, and survival requires understanding your position. He stood, walked slowly around her chair. You have information we need. We have the ability to make your life very difficult, or to end it entirely. The question is whether we can find an arrangement that benefits both parties. What kind of arrangement? You stop testifying. You leave Ohio, preferably the country. You disappear into a comfortable retirement funded by people who appreciate discretion. In exchange, we ensure that nothing unfortunate happens to you or your sister. Ada. They were threatening Ada again. And if I refuse? Then we have a different conversation, a shorter one. Kezia's mind raced. She was alone. No one knew where she was. The FBI's surveillance, whatever it was worth, had clearly failed. But she'd been in hopeless situations before, and she'd learned that the appearance of helplessness could be its own weapon. I need to think about it. Of course. You have until tomorrow morning. Drummond moved toward the door. I'll have someone bring you water and food. The accommodations aren't luxurious, but they're adequate. Use the time wisely, Dr. Hollins. Your life depends on the decision you make. He left. The door locked behind him. Kezia sat in the silence, testing her restraints, assessing her options. They thought they'd won. They thought kidnapping her, threatening her, offering her a way out would be enough to make her stop. They didn't understand. She'd spent her entire career documenting things that powerful people wanted hidden. She'd learned that the most important evidence was often the evidence that seemed impossible to preserve. And she'd taken precautions they didn't know about. They thought kidnapping her would end it. They thought threatening her family would make her cooperate. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Subscribe now, because Kezia Hollins has one more card to play, and it's about to change everything. The zip ties were tight, but Kezia's wrists were small. Hours of patient work, twisting, pulling, ignoring the pain as plastic cut into skin. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, marking time in the absence of any other reference. She thought about Ada, about Flynn Weaver, about the people who would be looking for her by now. She thought about the precautions she'd taken after the first round of threats 18 months ago. The dead man's switch she'd set up with a lawyer in New York. If she didn't check in every 48 hours, a package would be sent to the FBI, the Ohio Attorney General, and every major news outlet in the country. The package contained everything, not just the Boyce documents, but everything she'd gathered since, hints and fragments about the network Drummond had mentioned, the other judges, the other arrangements. Nothing conclusive, but enough to trigger investigations that would make the Boyce case look like a parking ticket. Drummond didn't know about the switch. No one did, except the lawyer who'd been paid in cash and knew her only by a pseudonym. She had maybe 30 hours before it triggered, 30 hours to either escape or find a way to stop it, because if the package went out while she was still captive, they'd kill her before the investigations could protect her. The right zip tie finally gave way. She froze, listened. No sound from outside the door. Her left hand was free. She worked on the right tie, faster now that she had leverage. 3 minutes later, she was standing, wrists bleeding, muscles cramped from hours of immobility. The room offered nothing useful. No weapons, no tools, no means of escape except the single door that was certainly locked and probably guarded. But the chair. The metal chair bolted to the floor had been designed to restrain, not to withstand someone who'd already escaped. The bolts were industrial, but the concrete around them was cracked, weakened by age or water damage. Kezia knelt, examined the bolts, 4 of them, one at each corner of the chair's base. She needed a lever, something to pry with. Her shoes. Professional pumps with reinforced heels. Not ideal, but the heel was metal-capped. It might work. She removed one shoe, wedged the heel under the edge of a bolt head. Applied pressure. The concrete cracked further. She worked for what felt like hours. One bolt loosened, then another. Her hands bled. Her shoulders screamed. Finally, the chair came free. She lifted it. Heavy, awkward, but solid enough to be a weapon. Now she needed the door to open. The guard came at what she estimated was 6 a.m. She heard footsteps approaching, keys jingling, the lock mechanism turning. Kezia positioned herself against the wall beside the door, chair raised. The door opened. A man entered carrying a tray, water bottle, sandwich, the basic sustenance Drummond had promised. He saw the empty restraints, the missing chair. He never saw the chair itself until it connected with the side of his head. He went down hard. The tray clattered. Water spilled across concrete. Kezia hit him again. Not to kill, to ensure he stayed down. He did. She grabbed his keys, his phone, his weapon, a compact pistol she'd never fired but understood the basics of. The hallway outside was industrial, bare pipes overhead, concrete floor, the aesthetics of a warehouse or manufacturing facility. She moved quickly, quietly. The phone in her pocket was locked, but emergency calls didn't require passwords. She found a stairwell, climbed. 1 floor, 2, 3. A door at the top opened onto a roof. Early morning light, gray, overcast, the particular quality of Cleveland dawn in late autumn. She could see the city skyline in the distance. She was somewhere industrial, east of downtown. The flats, maybe, or one of the old manufacturing districts along the river. She dialed 911. "This is Dr. Kezia Hollins. I've been kidnapped. I'm on the roof of a warehouse somewhere in the industrial area east of downtown. I can see the terminal tower from here. I need police and FBI immediately." The dispatcher's voice was professionally calm. "Ma'am, can you describe the building?" "Brick, 3 or 4 stories." "Saw. There's a..." She squinted at something visible on an adjacent structure. "There's a water tower nearby. Red. The name on it says Cuyahoga Industrial." "Stay on the line, ma'am. Help is coming." Kezia stayed on the line, watched the door to the roof, It burst open 8 minutes later. Not police, but 2 of Drummond's men, weapons drawn. She raised the pistol she'd taken from the guard. "Stop." They stopped, assessed. 2 of them, one of her. But she had cover behind an HVAC unit, and they were exposed in the doorway. "Put the gun down, Dr. Hollins. This doesn't have to end badly." "It ended badly when you kidnapped me. Now we wait for police." "The police aren't coming. We have people in dispatch." "Then we wait for FBI. I called them too." A lie, but they didn't know that. But they... The standoff stretched. Kezia's hands shook. Adrenaline, fear, the aftermath of hours of escape effort. But she kept the pistol raised, kept her eyes on the men in the doorway. Sirens in the distance. Getting closer. The men exchanged glances. "This isn't over," one of them said. They retreated through the door. Footsteps clattering down the stairwell. Kezia stayed where she was until the first police cruiser appeared in the parking lot below, until officers swarmed the building, until Agent Torres herself arrived, face tight with the particular expression of someone who had nearly lost a witness. "Dr. Hollins, are you hurt?" "I'll survive." "We need to get you to a hospital, then debrief." "Debrief first. There's something you need to know." Kezia lowered the pistol. Let an officer take it from her shaking hands. "Wallace Drummond. Drummond and Associates. He's the one who took me, and he's not working alone." "What do you mean?" "He mentioned other judges. A network. Arrangements that have been functioning for decades." She met Torres's eyes. Boyce wasn't an anomaly. He was part of something bigger. "And they're terrified that I'm going to expose it." Torres's expression shifted. Understanding, and something else. The particular hunger of an investigator who's just discovered their case is much larger than they thought. "Tell me everything." The debrief took 11 hours. Kezia recounted every word of her conversation with Drummond, every detail of the facility where she'd been held, every fragment of information that might help identify the network he'd described. FBI analysts worked through the night, cross-referencing, building profiles, connecting dots that had seemed unconnectable before. By morning, they had a picture. Not complete. There were gaps, names they couldn't identify, relationships they couldn't prove, but enough to understand the scope. 15 judges across Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. A web of law firms that specialized in sensitive matters. Corporate clients who paid premium rates for favorable rulings. Politicians who received campaign contributions in exchange for friendly appointments. A system that had operated for at least 40 years. A system that Franklin Boyce had been a small but significant part of. A system that Kezia's documentation had begun to unravel. "This is why they waited," Torres said. "They needed to assess the damage, determine how much you knew. When they realized you didn't have the full picture, they decided to take you out quietly." "But I do have more." Kezia's voice was hoarse from hours of talking. "The dead man's switch. If I don't check in by noon today, a package goes out to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in the country." Torres leaned forward. "What's in the package?" "Everything I've gathered since Boyce. Fragments, hints. Not enough to prosecute, but enough to trigger investigations that will find what I couldn't." "You've been building this for 18 months?" "I've been documenting. It's what I do." Torres was quiet for a long moment. "We need that package, Dr. Hollins. Not released to media, given to us, so we can build proper cases." "And what guarantee do I have that those cases will actually be pursued? That they won't be buried the way my reports about threats were buried?" "The guarantee is that I'm not letting this go, and I'm not the only one." Torres pulled out her phone, showed Kezia a news alert on the screen. "Your kidnapping is national news. The FBI director has personally committed to a full investigation. There's no burying this now." Kezia looked at the headline. "Dr. Kezia Hollins, rescued after kidnapping." FBI launches major investigation. National news. Again. She thought about Drummond's offer. Disappear. Retire. Let the system continue as it always had. She thought about about Patterson, who had died believing justice would eventually prevail. She thought about the families of Riverside Heights, still fighting for full remediation. She thought about every person who had been silenced, ignored, dismissed. Every witness whose testimony had been blocked. Every expert whose credentials had been questioned because of how they looked. "I'll give you the package," she said finally, "but I want something in return." "What?" "I want to be part of the investigation, not as a witness, as a consultant. I want to see this through to the end." Torres considered. "That's unusual. This entire situation is unusual. It would have to be approved by—" "Then get it approved, because I'm not handing over 18 months of work just to watch it disappear into bureaucratic limbo." Torres nodded slowly. "I'll make some calls." The investigation took 2 years. 2 years of grand juries and indictments. 2 years of trials and plea deals. 2 years of watching the network Drummond had described slowly, methodically dismantled. Wallace Drummond himself never faced trial. He died of a heart attack 3 months into the investigation, natural causes, according to the autopsy, though Kezia had her doubts. But his associates weren't so lucky. 14 judges removed from the bench, 23 attorneys disbarred, 8 corporate executives convicted of bribery and fraud. The largest judicial corruption case in American history, the media called it. Kezia testified in 11 of the trials. Each time she presented documentation. Each time she explained what the evidence showed. Each time she faced cross-examination designed to discredit her, to dismiss her, to reduce her credentials to nothing. Each time she prevailed. The system that had tried to silence her was being torn apart by its own records, the documents it had created, the communications it had preserved, the evidence it had never imagined would see daylight. Documentation. It always came back to documentation. 5 years after the Boyce verdict, Kezia stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., the National Press Club. Standing room only. Cameras from every major network. She was there to accept an award, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, for extraordinary contributions to justice and public accountability. But she was also there to deliver a message. "I'm not a hero," she began. "I'm an environmental engineer who documents contamination. I write things down. I follow protocols. I testify about what the data shows." The same words she'd spoken at the Ohio State Bar Association 5 years ago. But they meant something different now. "What I've learned, what the past 5 years have taught me, is that documentation is the most powerful weapon ordinary people have against systems that want to silence them." She paused, looked out at the crowd. "They called me a DEI higher-playing scientist. They blocked my testimony. They threatened my family. They kidnapped me and offered me a choice between silence and death. I chose neither. I chose documentation. I chose to write everything down, to preserve every piece of evidence, to create records that couldn't be denied or destroyed or explained away. And here's what I want everyone watching to understand. You can do the same thing. You don't need a doctorate. You don't need a government job. You don't need connections or resources or power. You need a phone, a notebook, the willingness to pay attention and write things down. Because the people who abuse power depend on silence. They depend on intimidation. They depend on the assumption that ordinary people will see injustice and look away. Don't look away. Document, preserve, testify, and never, ever stop fighting. The applause was thunderous. Kezia returned to Cleveland the next day. Same apartment, same view of the skyline, same coffee cup on the same counter where, 6 years ago, she'd found a photograph of her sister and realized the threats were real. Ada called that evening. "I watched your speech. You were amazing." "I was terrified." "Didn't show." Ada paused. "Mom would have been proud. Dad, too." "I know. What happens now? Kezia looked out the window. Lake Erie in the distance, the same water that had once caught fire and now reflected sunset colors like something almost hopeful. Now I get back to work. There's a new case. Industrial contamination in Toledo. Different company, different chemicals, same patterns. You're not tired of it? I'm exhausted. I've been exhausted for 6 years. Then why keep going? Kezia thought about the question. The honest answer. The one she'd never fully articulated even to herself. Because when I was standing in that warehouse, with zip ties on my wrists and no idea if I'd survive, I thought about all the people who wouldn't have anyone to document their stories. All the communities that would be poisoned while corporations calculated settlement costs. All the witnesses who would be silenced because no one taught them how to fight back. She paused. I keep going because if I stop, they win. Not Drummond, he's dead. Not Boyce, he's in prison. But the next ones, the ones who are watching right now, calculating whether it's safe to do what Boyce did, whether they can get away with it because no one is paying attention. I'm paying attention. I'll always be paying attention. And as long as I'm alive, I'll document everything they try to hide. Ada was quiet for a long moment. You really can't stop, can you? No, I really can't. Then I guess I'll keep worrying about you forever. I guess you will. Call me tomorrow? Every day, I promised. She hung up. Stood at the window as darkness settled over Cleveland. On her desk, a new case file waited. Different company. Different contamination. Same fight. She sat down. Opened the file. Documentation. Toledo Industrial Complex. Initial assessment. The work continued. In a federal prison in West Virginia, Franklin Boyce received a newspaper clipping from his lawyer. The headline, Dr. Kezia Hollins receives Presidential Medal of Freedom. He stared at the photograph for a long time. The woman he'd dismissed as a DEI hire. The woman he'd tried to silence. The woman who had destroyed his career, his freedom, his legacy. She was smiling in the photograph, standing at a podium, surrounded by people who admired her. He crumpled the clipping, threw it in the trash, but even as he did, he knew the truth. She had won, completely, permanently, and there was nothing he could do about it.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.